Morena, everyone, welcome to this meeting of Auckland Council of the Committee Whakarite Mahere, the Planning Committee of Auckland Council, today, Thursday, 3rd of September. And I open the meeting and we'll mute the music. We've done that. Welcome everybody. Welcome to Mayor Phil Goff, who is in the room. But I will take a roll call at the outset, and that way we know which members are in the room and which ones are online. And I'll hand to Duncan Glasgow to call the roll.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Sharon.
Hi, Sharon. Thank God, I don't know what second it keeps
excuse me, can we please mute the microphones? We're taking a roll call. So I just got, look, maybe before the roll call, if I could just remind everybody.
They let everybody know when it's starting, and we all know that we're all
This is a reminder,
you know?
Councillor Stewart, could you please turn your microphone to mute? Members, when you are speaking, could you please make sure you unmute your microphone and turn your camera on when you are speaking. If you can't turn your camera on for any reason, can you please identify yourself so that there's no question about who owns the voice. Now we'll go back to the roll call, and Duncan Glasgow, our governance advisor, will go through the roll. Duncan.
Can anyone hear me, please?
Just proceed.
No, we're having some sort of, no one on the call can hear us just at the moment. All right, I'll try again. Mayor Goff?
Present and correct.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore?
Present.
There we go. Councillor Bartley?
Present.
Councillor Casey?
Morena.
Councillor Collins?
Tarupalava.
Councillor Coombe?
Kia ora koutou I tēnei rā.
Councillor Cooper?
Good morning.
Councillor Dalton?
Morning.
Councillor Filipina? No. Member Henare? Councillor Henderson?
Good morning.
Councillor Hills?
Morena from Glenfield.
Councillor Mulholland?
Morning, here.
Member Namani?
Atamari.
Councillor Sayers?
Yeah, present, thank you.
Councillor Simpson?
Yes, I'm here, thank you. Morning.
Councillor Stewart?
Good morning, I can hear you.
Councillor Walker?
Here.
Councillor Watson?
Morning, Duncan.
Councillor Young?
Good morning. 大家好.
Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone to Mayor, Councillors and Independent Māori Statutory Board members, and welcome to members of the public who are observing this meeting online. I will firstly take apologies, and I have an apology, two apologies received for Councillor Fletcher and for Councillor Newman for absence. I'll move accordingly and
I'll second.
Second of...
Sorry, Chair. You're there, Chair, Councillor Filipina.
Councillor Filipina, are you an apology?
Yeah. No, I've been trying to get on, but they haven't sent the Skype link. I've sent an email to Duncan. Can he send it through to the email that I've sent it to him, please?
We
so
will
I can
do
get
that,
on the
but you
Skype
are
meeting.
with us. You are with us by phone, I gather, Councillor Filipina, so we'll note that accordingly that you are present at the meeting.
Chair, Toe is an apology, but I do understand, yeah, he's not well this morning.
Member Toe?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Namani. We will note that. So I moved it, and I have a second from Councillor Linda Cooper. Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. To the contrary, no. Declare that carried. Going to item 2, there are no declarations of interest, which takes
Sorry,
us...
Mr Chair, I have a declaration, now that I know the public forum items. in regards to 3.5.3, my mother is a member of Co-House.
Okay, we'll register that. Thank you. No other declarations have been notified to me, so I'll go to item 3, which is confirmation of the minutes, and I'll move receipt or confirming those minutes of the 13th of August 2020. And Councillor Bartley, would you like to second that, please?
Yep.
Thank you. So moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Declare that carried. We go to item 4, which is petitions, and I've received no petitions, which takes us to item 5, public input. Members, there are 6 requests, and there is a requirement under the standing orders to accept the 6 requests for public input, and they all relate to the item on the agenda, which we're going to shortly. I'll just run through the parties and how I think we could hear from the parties and then pose questions. We have Julie Scott from the Queensland Lakes Community Housing Trust on affordable housing and inclusionary zoning. On the same topics, we have Brennan Rigby and also Tom Gill. Then we go to the 4th contributor, which is Samuel Johnston. And then we go to Imogen Schutz, and the 6th is Ellie Croft. Now, I'll tell you a bit more about where each of those is from as they come before us, but I'm proposing that we go through all 6 and then pose questions at the end. And I would suggest that we limit it to 1 question per councillor, considering the time limit of 30 minutes under our standing orders all up. So I would hope now that we can hear from Julie Scott. Julie, are you with us on the line?
Yes, hello. I don't know if you can see us here.
Thank you, Julie. Now, we've got a little bit of echo. It might be your end. If there's anything that needs to be turned off there, or if you're nice and close to your microphone and there's no other interference, if you could just check that. And Julie, you're from the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust, and you'd like to speak to us about the paper before us, which is our item 8, the Affordable Housing Report Back.
Yes, that's correct. Is the echoing any better now?
Thank you, Julie. Julie, our standing orders provide 5 minutes, so we're very willing to hear you for the next 5 minutes on the key points that you'd like to raise. In your hands.
Okay. Great. Can you see, can I just confirm you can see the PowerPoint presentation okay?
At this stage, we cannot.
We'll just try and fix that up. So just while I'm actually here with Katie Russell, who's a policy planner from the Queensland Lakes District Council. We have quite a close relationship with council. So we're a not-for-profit trust. We were set up 13 years ago. We're actually created by council as a key recommendation that came out of their housing strategy in 2005. So we are a pretty small operation in terms of staffing numbers. We've got 1.9 full-time equivalents. We have a board of 6 trustees. We also have 3 councillor liaisons who come along to our board meetings, and they don't have voting rights, but they just provide feedback in terms of what council might think about what we're doing. We have a relationship framework agreement with council, which sort of outlines our responsibilities and requirements. But the main part of that relationship framework agreement is actually the inclusionary zoning. So how this works, and I'm sure you all have some understanding, so I've just kept it brief here. Hopefully you can see the PowerPoint by now. But it's all about sharing the value uplift that's created through the rezoning of land. So that's the upzoning of land when land is, say, rezoned from rural to residential. And the premise behind that is that uplift of value. There should be a little bit of that should be shared back with the community to facilitate more affordable housing. So this is enabled through council planning processes such as private plan changes and special housing areas. It comes across to us either in the form of land or cash. That depends on the development itself and the developer. Sometimes if it's a very high-end residential development, they may not want affordable housing down there, and we may not be able to build affordable housing down there. So sometimes we negotiate a cash outcome instead. But typically it's around 5 to 10% of the titled sections that are created will come across to our housing trust at nil consideration. So that's pretty significant, you can imagine. And we retain that, any sections that come across to us, we retain in perpetuity for the foreseeable future. Can you see the PowerPoint yet?
We can see we've seen the first slide, and we're now on to the second slide, which has got the pie chart.
Brilliant, brilliant. So that gives you a really good indication of how we're funded. So over the years, we've received Crown grants, and that's the reason that we're an independent trust rather than a council-controlled organisation. It enables us to tap into Crown funding as well as inclusionary zoning. So over the years, we've received close to $5 million from the Crown. We've received around $1.5 million from local council, and that includes an operational grant each year of $50,000 and one-off land contributions, council-owned land. But clearly the bulk of our funding comes from, I'll put here, developers. That is through the inclusionary zoning process. So you can see how significant that is for us. And of course, I'm keeping this really short, the outcome for us is that we receive land, we build housing, and we help people into homes. To date, we've helped 177 households through a variety of our programs. So we've got shared ownership, which is similar to the Housing Foundation model, if you're aware of that in Auckland. We don't actually offer that program anymore. We stopped offering that about 2 years ago, and we've moved to a new leasehold program, which is called Secure Home. And under that model, we retain the land in perpetuity, so it doesn't enable us to sell it off. And so that's quite similar to the community land trust model, where the land is held by the trust in perpetuity. This development that you're looking at here was a very first one, so we cut our teeth on it really. 27 houses. We bought the land with cash that we received from the Jacks Point developers, and at the time the Crown chipped in with $1 million as well. I haven't put all of our developments up here, I've just put a few. This land here, we received a piece of bulk land actually from the developer of the Shot Over Country private plan change. By right, we were entitled to 26 titled sections, but we actually went back to the developer and said, how about we get a piece of bulk land that's the equivalent value of 26 titled sections, and we'll do the civil works, we'll put in the infrastructure, and we can create a truly comprehensive development and get more bang for our buck. So we ended up with 44 houses. We put 3/4 of them into 3-bedders and 1/4 into 2-bedders, and we've got a mixture of tenures. Yeah. And lastly, we've got our Tyrrell Lane development, which we launched last year, and this is where we launched our Secure Home program, our leasehold model. So we've currently got 630 households on our waiting list. They're a mixture of about 1/4 of them are singles, 15% of them are couples, 20% of them are single parents, and around 40% of them are couples with children. And so families, the traditional family model, and then 3% of them are seniors. So it's a really good mix, and that's what we're all about. I'm happy to take questions at the end.
Fantastic, Julie. Thank you so much. And look, we appreciate you accommodating your presentation in that 5 minutes and a bit. What I'd like to do, Julie, is go through the other presenters, and then we'll take some questions from the members of the Planning Committee at the end. So thank you, Julie, and we'll come back to Julie if we have questions for her later. We'll now go to Brennan Rigby. Brennan, are you with us, please?
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Yes, I am.
Kia ora, Brennan. If you could take your 5 minutes now, please.
Sure. Kia ora, Chair Darby. Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak with you. Kia ora koutou councillors and members of the board and all of the others of you on the Skype. Kia ora, I'm Brennan Rigby. I work for Community Housing Aotearoa and I project lead a project called the Shift Aotearoa. Duncan, if you just flick through the slides as we go, I'll just pretty much speak to them anyway. I try and make my points fairly simply. The Shift Aotearoa, as you can see there, Community Housing Aotearoa has a vision of all New Zealanders well housed. Many of you are probably familiar with Cha and Cha's work. The Shift Aotearoa is a philanthropically funded project which is really focused on the right to housing in Aotearoa. And we'll talk about that a little bit through the presentation. I guess just a couple of things. First up, I'd like to thank, especially on behalf of Community Housing Aotearoa, the officers who have been involved in progressing this work over the last few years. Really nice to see this report coming back before the committee. And I've got on slide 3 a set of proposals that I'll just really leave with you, speak to them too much, but just to reinforce that Community Housing Aotearoa are very happy to and well placed to coordinate further work with the community housing sector, in particular on inclusionary zoning, but really any other matters relating to this affordable housing policy. It's a key interest of Community Housing Aotearoa and the Shift, so we welcome any further reach out or opportunity to participate in that work, especially if we can help to bring sector members together to speak with. So I'll just jump now a little bit into really the kaupapa of this brief presentation. As Duncan's just very astutely done, popped up a slide from Leilani Faha, Special Rapporteur on the Right to Housing, who was here in February. And the reason I picked this quote is because I'm going to talk to you about human rights law, but actually Leilani was really incredibly succinct in saying actually this law, this human rights law, is about dignity. It's about people being able to live in peace, security, and dignity. And when I look through the papers that you've had before you for this particular agenda item, I think there is an element that's missing. It's very easy to get tied down into the infrastructure and the funding mechanisms and the relationship with central government, and I completely understand that. But I really like the way that the human rights space brings us back to this place of realising that it's really important to protect the peace, security and dignity of our citizens and ratepayers. So that's why I'm interested in elevating and surfacing this human rights kaupapa. And I'll just, briefly run over the 3 things that we're proposing. One is that Cha would be happy to support any workshopping or information sharing on the human right to housing with council, elected members or officers. Likewise in relation to inclusionary zoning. And Mr. Chair, if I may be so bold, I have proposed a resolution. Obviously that's in your hands whether you wish to discuss that or not. So moving on through my presentation, I just want to make a very brief point that there's actually 2 sources of the right to housing in New Zealand, not just the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or other similar declarations. We actually have the right to housing embedded in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. As we can see here and on the following slide where it's translated. The right to home is different. The treaty right to home is different and complementary to the human right to adequate housing. But in a sense, it kind of provides us with a constitutional source of the right to housing. And again, I won't dwell on that due to timing, but just to be cognizant of that. The right to home is really well established in international law. It's been very well defined by the UN and other bodies. There's 7 recognised elements to the right, and I think when we read through them, they're pretty self-explanatory, but they're also pretty powerful. They're not left field, they're not crazy. If you go back to my earlier statements, I think they provide 7 really powerful ways of thinking about the dignity of families living in homes. And I think you can hopefully agree that, if all of these 7 things were being delivered really effectively, we'd be a long way down a track towards much better housing outcomes for our communities. So jumping from those 7 elements, just wanted to jump into really Leilani Whaha. She's really pushed for 2 things. One is the development of local domestic guidelines on the guidance on the right to housing, which the Human Rights Commission is currently developing. And the other is the development of human rights-based housing strategies. And we recognise at CHAR that nationally in New Zealand, many local authorities are actually talking about and thinking about developing housing strategies. And so there's another encouragement there to implement the right to housing as local authorities do that. And again, the offer's open to Auckland Council to be a part of that and indeed take some leadership in that in the national sense. And I'll just jump down to the final slide. I've noted, still in communication with Leilani Whaha, thinking about the things that local authorities are doing globally. Thanks, Duncan, for jumping down there. Globally, local authorities are promoting inclusionary zoning. They're curbing the trend towards short gig economy and doing those 2 things. And these are all things that Auckland Council can jump in on too with the support of community housing providers and others. So kia ora, happy to discuss any of those issues.
Thanks, Brendan. Nicely put, and thank you, and the shift Aotearoa. Brendan, stay on the line, and we will go through the other contributors here today. We'll now go to Tom Gill. Tom, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, morena, Tom. And you have 5 minutes, Tom. Would you like to proceed now?
Yes, thank you. Can you see this?
We have the first slide just coming up now. It was with us, but carry on, Tom. We now have it before us.
Thanks. My name is Tom Gill. I'm co-director, lead architect, and a future resident of the co-house development in Greyland. I just wanted to share some insights from the project in relation to the council's affordable housing program. First of all, just a quick definition of co-housing, which we often get asked. And we see it as owner-led multi-unit development with multi-unit housing with shared spaces and assets. We've noticed that there is a lot of demand for this housing typology, a lot of interest in Auckland. And what is unique about it? It is private sector housing development where the developers are the long-term owners, and this alignment of incentives produces high quality, sustainable housing stock and community creation, which is quite unusual. This is the location of the co-house project in Greyland, not far from the CBD. And just a few quick metrics about the project. We have managed to achieve 20 dwellings on a site which is zoned under the unitary plan. A compliance scheme would be 5 detached houses, so that's a 4 times increase in density. And this is the site shots taken yesterday. We're about 2/3 through the project. Quick slide about costs. The total value of the project is, the overall project value is around 20 million, which breaks down into these components. And I just wanted to mainly talk about some of the challenges the project has faced to get to this point, and then just explore some ways the council could maybe help out with those challenges for future projects of this sort. The legal complexity of a project like this is quite startling. There's no template for the corporate structure of a project like this in New Zealand, so we had to build one from scratch for ourselves and get approval from banks and lawyers of purchasing residents. Land availability, particularly in Auckland, but I would venture in most urban areas, is difficult when you're trying to buy a suitable site on the open market. We tried for 2 years, and we really only succeeded because the two lead families were able to basically purchase the site and fund the initial development costs without borrowing, which is a pretty fortunate position that not many projects would find themselves in. We had quite a long resource consent process on Co-House, and I think what we take out of it is that it's very difficult to have certainty of outcome. We found in the preliminary stages as to whether we were able to get the kind of consent that we needed. We estimate we spent approximately $650,000 on top of the land cost before we were in a position to say with confidence that the project would go ahead, and that money was essentially all that was largely at risk up to the point of getting a positive response during the planning hearing. I'll just skip straight to over to funding, because valuation funding are actually really tied together in terms of housing development. The dominant model of retail bank funding is pretty difficult for community-focused housing like co-housing. We had a lot of own equity in the project, but we are still dependent on a retail bank for development funding. They're dependent on valuations. Valuations do not price social capital. They put a very low value on common property, which is really the central part of co-housing developments. And the approval process is all or nothing. And in our case, we didn't get funding approval until we had a contractor on board. So just in terms of what we think council could do, or where council could assist for projects like this, land availability, inclusionary zoning has been talked about, but also access of some sort to Panuku sites or long-term leasehold options would be really interesting. During the resource consent process, we found council at times resistant to Co-House's design for increasing residential density, and we think that given the urgent need to build more and better housing in Auckland, we'd like to see council at processing level adopt a more positive and collaborative attitude to multi-unit housing proposals by default, particularly when they're not-for-profit. And we'd suggest that having specialists within council consent processing in housing to advise other processing officers would be advantageous. And finally, funding, looking at sources of funding outside the retail banking centre like housing bonds or loan guarantees would be very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate that. That's Tom Gill on behalf of the Grayland Co-House, a great example of innovative housing. And we could come back to Tom shortly with some questions if we have those. So, Tom, please stay on the line. We'll now go to Samuel Johnston of the Community Land Trusts. And now, Samuel, your turn. Are you with us, please? You have 5 minutes.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Mayor. Are you able to hear me and see me?
Mayor Goff is with us, and the other councillors are with us, and Independent Māori Statutory Board members are with us as well.
Yes,
Welcome,
good morning
Samuel.
to all
we
the
can
councillors.
See you.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, without further ado, I'll try and remain under my 5-minute slot. So, yes, Samuel Johnston. I'm a solicitor practicing in property law and trusts law, a law firm in South Auckland. Last year, I completed a Masters of Laws thesis. The thesis title was The Community Land Trust in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The subtitle is A Model of Land Tenure for Community and Sustainability. This thesis won the New Zealand Legal Research Foundation's award last month for Best Postgraduate Project of 2019. So I just want to share some ideas about the Community Land Trust model as one of the innovative models as a way forward as a solution to the Auckland housing crisis. So in my slot, I want to do two things. First of all is sketch out what the model is, and then explain to the committee 3 reasons why I believe that the model should be adopted. and as a foremost option to investigate under item 8, the further work program investigating further models. So, what is a community land trust? The model started out in the US civil rights movement of the 1960s. It's more recently spread to Europe and the UK, and more recently it's made its way down to Australasia. And you'll be aware of the Hamilton City Council's adoption of the model earlier this year and the establishment of the Waikato Community Land Trust. There's a few key features of the model. The basic structure is that a non-profit entity holds the land and residents hold the improvements. And that makes housing affordable because the price of land is taken out of the cost equation for residents. Now, it's a very flexible model, and it can be tailored to local objectives, really. And so it might be primarily an affordable housing focus, or it might have additional layers like a more community-oriented approach, for example, shared common areas, community gardens, whatever the local community is interested in. Governance is a little bit different to your conventional housing arrangements, both in the private sector and in traditional charitable housing trusts and community housing providers, because power is shared. It's a more democratic model and usually a tripartite structure, whereby 1/3 of the control is held by residents themselves, 1/3 is held by leaders in the local community, business leaders and experts, and 1/3 is held by stakeholders, for example, council or other financial stakeholders. So there's a balance in the control, but the emphasis is on control that is localized of the community land trust. And the other aspect to mention about the model is that it's one of the models that prioritizes housing's function as for shelter over and above housing's function as an investment commodity. And that was really the core principle in the start of the model in 1972. The authors of the original guide said the land trust would decommoditize the land and ensure perpetual affordability. So, why should the council adopt this model in particular? Well, first of all, I would suggest that this community land trust model is a different paradigm of property, and a different paradigm that strikes at the root of all these complex issues is the only way to get a really meaningful solution to the Auckland housing crisis. Some of the options on the table at the moment that the council has researched and considered might go some way, but they will also perpetuate the ongoing problems, not really solve anything. So the Community Land Trust is an opportunity to be a legitimate institutional alternative to private ownership in the Auckland region. And really, I want to link up with what Mr. Brendan Rigby said about dignity. Community Land Trust gives residents a voice and the local community a voice. So residents have dignity and the local community is empowered. So it's a different model of ownership, and it's not inferior to private ownership, but fundamentally different. The second reason why I believe the council should adopt this model of land tenure, or at least investigate it, is because its unique institutional character creates scope for stakeholder finance and partnerships between central and local government. Now, that is the model in the UK, actually, whereby the UK central government supports the National Community Land Trust Network and local authorities support local initiatives. And those two approaches work together to broaden the tenure mix in that country. But through that, a key theme is that the local voice should not be marginalised, even though there's stakeholder involvement. But it does redress some of the issues that Mr. Thomas Gill spoke about, in access to finance being a difficulty for community-led developments. A third point to emphasise is that the Community Land Trust can promote biculturalism, and it's supportive of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. There are strong links between the Community Land Trust model and Papakainga, both in its vision of land itself and in the more collective approach to housing. And there's been strong interest by iwi in supporting the model. And to conclude, basically, in my work, I've done a lot of the research groundwork in tailoring the legal options to Aotearoa's legal context, and I have a hybrid community land trust model which is already developed in there, which I would proffer to the community in an act of goodwill. So I think that there's scope for further research of this model, but also I would push for action and implementation of this particular model in a pilot project. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Samuel. Interesting model, the Community Land Trust model, as outlined by Samuel Johnston, their members, and something for consideration. Please, Samuel, stay with us at the meeting, and we have two other speakers, and then we will go to questions from the members of the Planning Committee. Thank you, Samuel. Next to speak to us is Imogen Schutz from the Society for Alternative Housing Development. And I'll now pass to Imogen. Imogen, are you with us? We don't have Imogen as yet. She was with us. What I think I might do is, as we try to raise Imogen, we'll go to Ellie Croft. Ellie Croft is from Women in Urbanism. And Ellie, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Ellie. Thank you. And would you like to proceed and take your 5 minutes now, Ellie?
Yes, that's fine with me. So I'm mainly here as an interested future resident of co-housing and also representing Women in Urbanism. And Women in Urbanism is a group of women with over 2,000 followers on Facebook and members from all over the country. And we're really passionate about creating inclusive cities. And we really think that addressing affordable housing is part of creating those inclusive cities. So during lockdown, we had a Women in Urbanism hosted a webinar with Greer O'Donnell from the Urban Advisory, and it was about community-focused housing models in New Zealand. And the event was really popular. It had it reached its 100 people Zoom limit, and we had heaps of people reaching out asking if it had been recorded. And I just checked this morning, and the recording has now had 430 views on YouTube. And so I guess repeating some of what other people have already said today is, right now I think housing in New Zealand is seen as a commodity, something to make profit out of. But if we are really going to address things such as well-being and affordability issues, we need to consider housing as a human right. And our current housing situation needs to change. And I think, as others have said, there are so many other housing models out there. And in New Zealand, we really only think of three models. We think of home ownership, renting, and social housing. But if we look overseas, we can see there are so many other models, such as community land trusts discussed earlier, property cooperatives, and co-housing. And the demand for affordable housing solutions is real. And in my case, I also think that the demand for co-housing is real. I was introduced to the concept of co-housing through the book Happy Cities, but actually by Charles Montgomery, thanks to the Auckland Council and then Conversations 5 years ago. Thank you. And I'm interested in co-housing not only for the affordability issues, but also the community creation benefits. I like the fact that the collective sharing of resources in a co-housing development, such as a spare guest room, a large courtyard, a tool shed, and large spare hosting kitchens, allows people to access these amenities at their own home without having to live miles away from their workplace in order to afford them. And I think what's important also to note is that the size limit of these co-housing developments means that I think residents actually feel true ownership over these amenities, which can disappear when a development becomes too large. When I describe the basic co-housing concept to friends renting, almost everyone has responded with a keen interest to know more. Right now, I do not feel like there is many options in New Zealand for people to get involved in co-housing, or even simply a place to engage in the subject. It's fantastic to see the council is taking an intervene and lead approach to affordable housing, but I think like three main demands I'd say for council, just reiterating what others have said. I think it would be awesome if the council could allocate land for affordable community-focused housing developments. Land can be set aside in a community land trust, potentially via leasehold, so that housing developments occur above ground while the council gets ground lease payments for the land. Another thing that council could do was just creating those dialogues and conversations on what are alternative models of housing for addressing the intermediate housing markets. I think that these different housing models are generally not widely understood, and because of this, as mentioned before, I think it'd actually be a really cool, even for councillors to get involved in a workshop just to talk on the conversation on what are alternative models of housing. And the third demand, I think, would be, I think it could be really cool if the council looked to invest into research on the existing and future demands of the intermediate housing market. I think understanding the intermediate housing market demand post-COVID might just give even more weighting into why we need to create / adopt new innovative housing model solutions. So today I'm here as an interested future resident of co-housing, and yeah, I really hope we can move forwards on this issue. Thanks a lot, Ali.
Thank you, Ali. Members, that's Ali Croft on behalf of Women in Urbanism and a co-house resident. And please, if you would like to be, that is, at Grey Lynn. And if we could just think of the questions you might be asking the respective members. Now, we've got one more speaker before we go to the questions, and that is Imogen Schutz of the Society for Alternative Housing Development. Imogen, are you with us now? No. Okay. Look, we'll make sure, members, that we receive Imogen's submission. I'm sure she can put something together in writing and contribute it to us, so our staff will ensure that occurs. Members, we have exceeded the 30 minutes as per the standing orders, but I know there's some that do have some questions. Can I please limit the questions to one per member, please? And I've got notice from Councillor Cashmore first with a question, please. Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks to all the presenters. Very interesting. My question is to Julie, from the Queenstown Affordable Housing. What was the differential between your rural zoned land and your urban zoned land in price?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it changes all the time. There's just, yeah, case by case, so it's very hard to put a number on that.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because when I went around and looked at those ones in Queensland, there was quite a big difference. And even when you, is it right when you say when you add the infrastructure costs, you were still under the brownfields housing costs?
Yeah, I guess any land developer will freely admit that they won't look at a development unless there's at least a minimum 30% profit in it for them. That's certainly the advice that we hear from them. So I guess in terms of, an additional payment or fee or cost to that land development, they weigh that up and then decide whether it's going to be doable or not. And every time it seems to be the case that it is. In the last special housing areas that went through, they were paying 10% of the total sections they were agreeing to pay across to the trust. So yes, it is a big cost, but it still must be well worth it for the developer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. Thank you, Julie, for the reply. I have a question from Councillor Casey, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yesterday we spent 90 minutes discussing universal design, and I was very pleased, Brennan, to see that accessibility is one of the 7 tenets at law of home ownership. But Julie, my question is to you: what do Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust? How do they address, or how do you address accessibility in terms of universal design in both your current development and future developments?
That's a good question, and it's something that we do incorporate into our developments. So we've probably done half a dozen developments to date. Our very first one that you saw in the slides, we didn't incorporate any accessible design into it. But as we've evolved, we understand the need for it, and we're seeing households on our waiting list who do need accessible design. So typically we're putting probably around 10 to 15% of any development will be fully accessible. I'd love to get that up a bit higher, but at the moment it is that balancing of cost as well. And of course it's looking at our waiting list and determining what is best needs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Casey, and thank you again, Julie. I have a question from Mayor Felgoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and can I thank all of the contributors? I found it really interesting, and if I can regard all of the contributors as maybe a potential resource for council officers and for elected representatives to draw upon. But I'm going to join with the last two questioners in overloading Julie with my questions. The questions are basically, most of your funding are coming from developers. Is that in lieu of a development contribution, or is it in addition to that? And what is the actual requirement, and how is it imposed on the developers to actually get the property passed across to your trust?
Well, that's a really good question, and one that we often get asked, but it is not in lieu of development contributions. So DCs are still paid as per the normal process. It's completely separate. It has worked differently with respect to whether it's gone through private plan changes or special housing areas, but historically and initially the QLDC was enabling this through the RMA. So it's in addition to DCs. I've forgotten what the other second part of your question was. Sorry, Phil.
The second part was what is the how do you impose that requirement on developers? I presume it's not simply a voluntary contribution, but a requirement under council bylaws. But can you just elaborate on that, please?
Yes, so initially it went through the district plan, and so it was a private plan change within QRBC's district plan that made a requirement for a community affordable housing contribution. How that worked was when developers were going through their private plan change application, they would sign up to a stakeholder deed with the council agreeing to a contribution. Earlier on, it was very much a negotiation process, and sometimes it would vary between 3% to 5%. Our council is currently going back through that process again and putting new inclusionary zoning provisions into the district plan, which they're hoping to have notified in December. And we want to get it standardised so that it's like a DC process. It's really clear to developers upfront what the requirements are in terms of affordable housing, and it could be a similar sort of process to the DCs.
Thank you, Mayor Goff, and thank you again, Julie. Now, I've got one final question. I'll take one final question, and that is from the Deputy Chair of the Planning Committee, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm seeing some kind of working group form with the people that have presented in public forum, and maybe a subcommittee of this committee regarding affordable housing and offices. But I wanted to ask about our housing policy mix, and I'm hearing people say you don't sell the land. So what are people's thoughts around how we're supposed to do our housing mix then if we're not going to sell the land? Because that was the understanding, was you sell so that you can provide for social and affordable. Maybe Samuel could answer it. Very interested in that.
Samuel, did you hear that question from Councillor Bartley?
Good morning, Councillor. Yes, well, if you look at the precedent models in the UK, say, for how these community land trusts are capitalised, that's a good question, because they want the land, but they also want capital for development. So often in the UK, the approach has been, via some kind of plan change or planning permission. So it's so they get a transfer of value via that means. And basically, if there were finance available for improvements, and this is an important aspect of the legal design, then I think that the land would be able to be retained by council or transferred into the CLT entity. So it's a question of finance, I think, for improvements. But can you, does that satisfy your question, or what?
Not really.
No. So you're saying you want to...
That's okay, Samuel. Councillor Bartley, do you want to just put that to Samuel again then?
It was just, like how we do affordable housing and social housing with the models that we have at council through Panuku, through Tamaki Regeneration. There's the housing mix policy, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And I'm hearing people say we shouldn't be selling the land, but that's the only way, apparently, that we can get the capital to provide for the affordable and the social housing is by selling on the private market. So,
Yeah. Well, I think the community land trust model is more of a quasi-public model than a private model, private market model. And if you look at what's happened with Papa Kainga, there's a tripartite agreement between what was Housing New Zealand, Kainga Ora, and then Kiwi Bank, and then the statutory incorporation. And so the money comes from, not from selling the land, which is retained, but for lending for the improvements. So I think that's the way that you're meant to get the money, rather than just selling the land. So in affordable housing, say a shared equity scheme, you'd sell, a portion of the fee simple estate in the property, which the bank would take security of. In other places, in other countries, the bank might take security of only a leasehold interest, which is less than the land and improvements, but it's still a good security. So the question in this country is banks are hesitant to lend for anything other than fee simple estates or stratum estates. And so it's sort of engineering a way that you can get retain the land, but also get finance via an appropriate security and legal model. And so that Papa Kainga finance model was one which I was interested in. Yeah.
Thank you, Samuel. I think we need a bigger conversation, and we will have that. Thank you, Councillor
Thank you,
Bartley.
Mr.
Now, we've got Imogen, Imogen Schutz is now on the line. So we've finished with the questions, members, but I think we'll go back to Imogen. So Imogen, are you with us now?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Thank you, Imogen. Imogen, look, can you take your time now? We need to proceed with our meeting, but we've reconnected with you, or connected with you. So if you could take your 5 minutes now, please, Imogen.
Thank you. I appreciate being accommodated to my technical difficulties here. Yeah, I wanted to say thank you for the time to speak, and also to congratulate Pania and the team on their hard work with all of these papers that we're considering today. So I speak as a trapped renter with 2 decades of experience, and also as a previous occupant of the housing cooperative. I'm also speaking on behalf of SARD, Society for Alternative Housing Development, and have some professional experience in relation to today's topic as well. So the Society aims to inform, educate and advocate across 3 key areas of housing. This includes co-housing, which we haven't heard much about so far today, but community land trusts as well as co-housing. So community-focused housing enables people and communities to play a lead role in addressing their own housing needs. It can play a part in meeting affordable housing supply, as we've heard so far today already anyway. It's between owning and renting, but offers a more security of tenure than renting does. And community-focused housing offers considerable wellbeing health benefits. The Society has a webinar that you can find on our site, alternativedevelopment.org.nz. And we've also got an advocacy piece there in relation to the upcoming central government election, where we've got key policy asks that we're putting forward, which align quite well with some of the things being considered today. So we note that the paper doesn't necessarily recognise yet community-focused housing as a sector in its own right, which we feel that we are, and we're becoming quite more so. As such, we are not represented in existing engagement or as a potential delivery partner in the future. In terms of COVID impacts, we see this as only increasing the demand for community-focused housing and affordable housing going forward. We note that the documents mention surplus land. We haven't seen a definition of how surplus land is mentioned. It does imply low quality and potentially poor location as well. We want to see some really clear actions and strategies that aimed at preventing gentrification. Obviously, council rightly so invests in a number of key locations to upgrade them. In those areas, we want to see some anti-gentrification measures put in place. We're also aware that there's a lack of data on the supply of affordable housing, which we think would be great to address as well. So going forward, I think it was mentioned by one of the councillors there that we decided would welcome further engagement going forward, particularly a workshop possibly on community-focused housing and the role it can play going forward. I understand that possibly there's a piece of work that's mentioned in the Future Work program, where there's a piece that Kōmiti has developed. We'd welcome some additional support to improve capacity building, awareness and engagement across the relevant sectors to support greater uptake of community-focused housing in Tamaki Makaurau. We welcome Auckland Council using its accountability levers to set clear targets of location-based affordable housing dwelling numbers and subsequently to monitor the supply of affordable housing in these key locations to prevent further gentrification occurring. So in terms of some of the way that was mentioned before about land being sold and possibly that being considered for highest and best use, we want to see returns on investment to include social and environmental as well, not just purely economic. So we would love to see land allocated in a strategic and targeted manner for community-focused housing across the key regeneration areas that Council is focusing on. So this could be done through a leasehold arrangement where possibly there's ground rents payable back to Council. Sam's touched upon that, I believe, in his presentation and questions as well. So going forward, we recommend that Council take a really bold and brave approach on the intervene and lead approach it's taking on affordable housing, and that also would include establishing a Tamaki Makaurau Community Land Trust, and through the long-term plan, allocate funding to support the establishment of community-focused housing projects as per Hamilton's considerations currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Imogen. Now, I'll take one question. Is there a single question for Imogen? There being not, we'll proceed. Imogen, thank you so much. Bold and brave you're inviting us to be, and that's key. Thank you. Now, members, I'll just put a bundle motion acknowledging the contributors here today, receiving their input, and of course we'll make sure that our staff are in touch with these contributors today. So to Julian, Brendan, Tom, Samuel, Imogen and Ali, thank you for these really strong contributions before the committee here today on affordable housing, the discussion that is really important for this council, and we're going to tap into the further knowledge that you bring. We can't solve this together. It does require partnership, and thank you for your partnership here today in front of the committee. Councillor Bartley, would you like to move accordingly?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Mayor Goff, would you like to second? Thank you. It's moved by the Deputy Chair and seconded by the Mayor, an acknowledgement and receipt from all the contributors here today. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, members. We'll now proceed with item 7. There are no extraordinary items notified in advance, which takes us to the item that we've just been introduced to by the public input contributors, and that is that's item 8, and you'll find it on page 11 of the agenda, members, the Affordable Housing Report Back and approval of the Forward Work Program, and the key author is Pania Elliott, our Principal Policy Analyst, supported by Karaina Maki, and Karaina is our General Manager of Community and Social Policy. And we've got them in the room, actually, before us, and I will hand to the presenters now. And I think it is Pania to introduce. Pania, welcome.
Kia ora koutou, thank you, Chair.
I just need to bring that microphone pointed a little bit closer. Thank you.
Thank you. Duncan, I think we've got some slides. Oh, thank you so much. So, tēnā koutou katoa, talofa lava. I'll just briefly introduce the report, and then colleagues Phil Reid and Claire Walsh-Shaw will have a slide on the planning matters. So this work comes from a committee decision last year that Council should intervene and lead on affordable housing by investigating regulatory and non-regulatory interventions, and this included the Independent Māori Statutory Board's Kāinga Strategic Action Plan and increasing the stock of housing for older people. And a large number of staff from across the council whānau have contributed to this work and delivered this work, so they're standing by to answer any questions as needed. So just to recap on the narrative of the report, there's been a strong growth forecast in the intermediate housing market, and the data up front in the report help tell this story. People are using different strategies to navigate the intermediate market, some leaving Auckland, some drawing on government family support and support from community housing providers. The problem is unlikely to be solved by a potential recession due to COVID-19, and the government policy creates some opportunities for us. Some of it's quite complementary to the work we want to do, and Attachment B sets this out in detail. And Council can make a further contribution to this, to affordable housing, using its key levers and building on current work. Thank you. So I just refer you to Attachment A. So as well as investigating the different interventions, we decided to form this into a forward work program to put these findings into action. So that's set out for your approval as Attachment A. And yeah, just to outline, there's some key strengths and weaknesses of the work program. So key strengths are that it's adaptive and leverages existing budgets given COVID impacts. It's got a focus on the key levers that Council can use and key priority groups. It's a mix of quick wins and longer term improvements, and it also includes that piece on better measurement, monitoring and reporting on progress and effectiveness, and that includes through the Auckland Council and Government Joint Work Programme on urban development and through to this committee. And it sets a partnership in place that's a platform for further partnerships with government and sector, and it sets us in good stead for future policy directions. Thank you. And the weaknesses are really that there's no magic bullet. It's a series of small incremental improvements, so it's sort of the sum of the parts. And we can't guarantee all the outcomes. There are some dependencies around sector uptake and government's response and direction. So if okay, I'll just hand over to Claire and Phil, who are standing by. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, just one more slide. And I'll just refer you to Attachment C. So this is our qualitative assessment. There's a summary in Attachment C of the different interventions, and then the full qualitative assessment set out in Attachment D. And we have Claire and Phil, I think, standing by via Skype. Claire and Phil, are you?
Yes, we are.
Thank you, thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Through the chair, Phil Reid here, and I have with me Claire Walshaw. Claire, within Plans and Places, has been leading this work and is available for detailed questions, and particularly ones related to the Queenstown presentations we had earlier as well. So what I've done here is just preview what we will report to you on within November. And I must stress this is where we stand at the moment, and we will continue to explore the issues and ideas from the public forum this morning. I don't think there's any disagreement in relation to the benefits that can come from if we are successful and do actually manage to achieve an operative status of a plan change which either addresses a mandatory inclusionary zoning or looks to progress incentives through a voluntary inclusionary zoning. The issue, as far as I see it, is the risks associated with being able to actually get to that operative status. So just to look at the actual policy settings that we've got for mandatory inclusionary zoning, through the HASHA legislation, there was support for the provision of affordable housing because of the incentives that were given through the decision-making, appeal rights and speed of processes to actually get those precincts and resource consents in place. That was a sufficient incentive that the public could give back, which was the provision of affordable housing, was taken up as an opportunity, and there were a large number of those that did occur through SHAs. There was an attempt to continue that on through the actual proposed unitary plan itself, where we looked to have a threshold of 15 units and beyond being a mandatory requirement that a 10% retained affordable housing be provided. This, however, fell over at the recommendations phase by the Independent Hearings Panel, and the decision by Council was to go with that recommendation. So we currently do not have provisions within our plan that seek a mandatory inclusionary zoning. The policy landscape since that point in time has not changed markedly. I do want to acknowledge that there is this December plan change, which we will be looking at very closely from Queenstown to look at how they actually propose to do that, whether it's through a mandatory requirement or through a voluntary requirement. But the recently released National Policy Statement for Urban Development, which does have as a main objective affordable housing, has a policy response which is enabling of supply and does not seek to actually utilise either value uplift levy or inclusionary zoning of any sort. So the original submission by central government on the unitary plan was opposed to our affordable housing provisions that we had, and the most recent national direction through that National Policy Statement on Urban Development doesn't take up any further opportunities of utilising these planning tools. So I'm not so sure that the actual policy landscape has changed significantly since our last attempt that failed in 2015. The voluntary inclusionary zoning, which is the incentive-based technique, can potentially deliver this because there is an element of choice where there are standard provisions which will apply through the unitary plan, or bonus provisions that can apply where the developer can choose to take that opportunity but must give back through the provision of affordable housing. Now, my observation of that is that it works best when there is a bonus which relates to site size. And we had that in place for our mixed housing suburban and mixed housing urban zones when we notified our proposed plan. But through the recommendations and decisions phase, as you'll be aware, we have removed density from most of our residential zones other than the single house zone. So the ability to provide a bonus is not available through allowing for developments that go beyond density. There are other techniques that you could take, such as by enabling additional height or additional site coverage, which were looked to be explored in the latter parts of the hearings process with the Independent Hearings Panel, when Council had moved to consider the situation of not having density. However, the panel recommended against those provisions as a whole. I must also stress that there are other issues that we need to look at very carefully. That if under the RMA you are looking to allow for affordable housing through a bonus provision, you do need to make sure that you can actually have a strong policy framework in place for that. So we would need to actually make sure that we have this right from the regional policy statement down through into our district plan provisions as well. So in November, I intend to have a report brought back which actually dives into these issues in far greater detail, takes a positive approach to this because I don't want to create a message where there is a lack of pursuit of the benefits from this, because I see that there are some huge prizes that can be achieved from this, but I do want to make sure that any recommendations that come to you about future plan changes do take an eye to the risk of being able to get those plan changes in place. So the principal focus at the moment is for us to actually push for further legislative support in this area and to work with other councils to be able to continue to put that pressure, and then to explore all other ways that we can within the existing planning system to be able to support these outcomes being achieved.
Thank you, Phil. Pania, back to you, is it?
Oh, kia ora, through the chair, thank you. We've finished our presentation, so thank you.
Thank you, Pania, and Phil as well. Now, on the line, members, we do have a number of our key staff. We've got some 15 key staff online that can fetch your most difficult questions, I think. So I'm inviting some difficult questions. Now, I just want to signal, we do have a motion before us. That's a staff recommendation. It outlines attachment A there. Probably when I look at attachment A, a lot of it is actually underway or in place, and the only real outstanding is the further report that Phil Reid refers to, and that's the report on inclusionary zoning and increasing our stock of housing for older persons. Now, having talked to a few councillors and the Mayor this morning, I think there's going to be a bit more than just that A on the table, but I'll invite Councillor Bartley to move the A at the outset and would the Mayor like to second the A to put it on the table?
Yeah, pro forma.
Okay, we'll put, Councillor Bartley, would you move the A? And the Mayor will second the recommendation under A, that is to approve the work program, which is attachment A, and that's a single page on page 25. And there's likely to be further motions coming forward. Now, let's take some questions. And I don't have any at this time. I have plenty in the room, though. I'll start with the Mayor. Mayor Goff.
Yeah, and thank you for officers for putting the work forward. But in a sense, we've spent 18 months, and I'm not quite sure how far advanced we were from when we looked at this in March last year. And I guess the area that we've got the greatest focus on is inclusionary zoning. So my questions are to Phil Reid. I think what you're actually telling us, but trying to let us down gently, Phil, is that you don't think that we would survive a challenge before the Environment Court for the imposition of inclusionary zoning. Have I got that right? Maybe I'll just start with that question.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, okay. In which case we're in a bit of a position like we were yesterday with universal housing design, exactly parallel actually. So what you're saying to us is that this needs an approach to central government for legislative change. Do you have any, this is just an off-chance question, do you have any insight as to why central government hasn't moved on this, given its commitment to affordable housing, other than what you've mentioned, which is the focus of the national policy statement was on supply, and the worry was that this might impede supply. Is that the guts of it?
Yes, I think the approach by central government through the National Policy Statement on Urban Development is to further support that supply side perspective. So supporting a greater range of typologies across a greater range of locations.
So my last question through you, Mr. Chair, is this. When you come back to us, I'd really like it if you could include in your report the guts of the Independent Hearing Commissioner's opposition and what our response to that is. The Productivity Commission that was likewise unenthusiastic, but also an assessment. I think you said you were going to look at Queenstown, because I presume they had trade-offs that they could do to get that contribution from their developers, but also just an assessment of how the inclusionary zoning worked under a place like Hobsonville. And, you know, we've got Adrian Young-Cooper who can probably help us with that, and Chris Aiken. But my impression from both of those individuals is that the inclusionary zoning worked quite well in Hobsonville. Can you comment on that? And can you make sure that when we get the report back in November, we've got a pretty full-blown account, and you know, where we've got opposition coming from independent hearing commissioners and potentially the Environment Court, what are our responses? How could we meet those criticisms and overcome them?
Yes, we'll commit to all of that.
So, sorry, just part of that, if I can get you to address now, is can you tell us a little bit about, say, Hobsonville Point and what the outcome of the inclusionary zoning requirement was for that? I presume that was done under the special housing areas.
My understanding, yes, there were some special housing area developments at Hobsonville, but there was also the enabler of that to be driven through the actual land ownership itself, and the establishment of typologies, the requirements that are on titles, and the precincts themselves that were originally crafted through the Waitakere district plan.
And your impression about the success of the inclusionary zoning? Because Chris Aiken talked he lives there, and he said it worked really well. Is that the impression you have? Do you have have you done any research on it?
Well, my own personal observation of that, and I haven't carried out any specific research on that, is that you're correct that Hobsonville is probably the best example that we've got of where there is that mix of affordable housing and in a way which actually works well as a community.
Thank you.
It is interesting that the chief executive and the chair responsible for Hobsonville moved into the community and now live there. And I've just learned a well-known journalist has moved there as well. So it is a huge success, and it's a really good question the Mayor's asked there. How come it worked so well there? And I think it's a really good model for us to look at, and look at a lot harder. Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou and kia ora Pania. Thank you for the work on this report. It's great to see it coming to us. I have two questions, if I may. The first one, just in terms of clarifying around inclusionary housing, is it the same when we heard about this example from the Community Housing Trust in Queenstown? Is that the same thing as value uplift created through rezoning, and is that something different? And if so, is that something we're also looking at as part of the forward work program?
Shall I
Thank you
respond to
through
that
the
one?
chair.
Okay.
Phil, if you can respond, that would be great. Thank you.
So yes, inclusionary zoning can be through provision of land or through provision of land and development, which is then held in trust, or it can be through provision of levy. So the value uplift levy, my understanding of that is that where there is a windfall profit that comes from a rezoning, then a part capture of that windfall profit occurs and goes back into a fund, which is then able to be used for the purpose of affordable housing.
Thank you. So that might be that we might find it difficult to progress a plan change in terms of inclusionary zoning, but we might be able to look at a bylaw that does provide for value uplift about where we're doing rezoning. So there could be, what I'm hearing is that there's different elements of these tools which are complementary, but there might be things that we can progress that might be more straightforward and we might have the power to progress. So I just want to make sure that that's captured.
We will make sure there's a section specifically on value uplift levy.
Yeah, and can I just ask a further question, if I may? So we heard that yesterday, just from the Waiheke local board, they're looking at increasing social housing or senior housing on Waiheke by leveraging a piece of council land, and it needs to go through a whole business case. You know, it's a long way from getting progressing at this stage, but I just wanted to understand, does this, the forward work program, and I see in there that there is an intervention in terms of investigating increasing the stock of housing for older people. Does that mean that the Waiheke local board would actually be given some officer support to be able to progress a project like that? And I do just highlight, I mean, there is a lot to get through in terms of the business case and how that, you know, whether the land is, how that's incorporated, but they're looking at partners with social housing partners, and it just could possibly be an exemplar project for us to progress as part of this package.
So through the chair, this is another matter we're reporting back in November, but to clarify, at the moment, the only investment in housing council kind of has is in Haumaru, who delivers elderly people housing for us. There is, at this stage, without further funding or further decisions which would need to be made, no council policy or funding for increasing support to elderly housing. So that's why Councillor Casey made the resolution from the last committee to investigate that. You will see there are some parts of a qualitative assessment in this report. However, like inclusionary zoning, it needs to come back into advice about whether you want to continue on with these matters or not, and what the costs of that might be. So we're getting to the point where lots of things cost. So all the things that we can leverage are in the work program, and additional matters require additional funding generally.
Right, so the Waiheke local board should really be directed to ensure they've got their business case done by November when this is reported back, and to show how that business case will be, the project will be progressed at no cost to council?
So through the chair, the Waiheke Local Board, I think, has been looking at that for some 4 years. This report back in November is about the high-level policy settings and levers that council will decide whether it wants to do more than it is currently done through giving its partnership with Haumaru. So council has made some policy choices in the past about how it provides housing to elderly in order to access government subsidies for housing, and that's gone to Haumaru. You will see in the report that the loan that Haumaru had and the number of housing that actually delivered for that amount, that it's quite an expensive business. Pānuku have helped to cost up, what the extent of getting more fully into provision of housing to elderly might be. I think it was $2 billion or something in there, which is why we are asking that we bring back a full report for you to consider. So I suppose there's no real free things anymore, and so we are very conscious about the impacts of COVID on budgets. So the Waiheke is a specific initiative that Waiheke is trying to further, and that's why I assume Finance has advised them to do a specific business case as part of the LTP round, and that will need to go through the LTP funding timeframes.
Okay, look, thanks for that. So it's going to be important then when this paper comes back in the political working group that the Deputy Chair will be leading, subject to this motion going forward, of course, but it's going to be really important to engage Panuku, our Chief Economist, our finance people, looking at costs, but also looking at benefits and quantifying the value of those benefits. So when this paper comes back, we can weigh up those so-called costs on one side and the benefits. We've got an enormous problem in Auckland, and since we first canvassed this way back in 2015, 2016, that problem has just taken off on us, and that's what I've heard from Councillor Bartley in the last couple of days, is this problem has taken off and we're no further ahead grappling with it. There's a lot of information, but there's a real political desire to tackle this one and tackle it sooner and not later. So look, if I can just say, let's look at the costs, yes, but let's look at the benefits and that's pertaining to the inclusionary zoning and the increase in the housing stock for older persons. Councillor Coombe? Oh, sorry, you finished, Councillor Coombe? Councillor Cooper?
I mean, this may have been answered, but I mean, I was part of the unitary plan adoption where we decided it was really difficult to maintain that inclusionary zoning because we didn't know how to monitor it and make sure those houses were retained by people that needed them. So I guess I suppose that's what we're looking at, aren't we? Just how can we basically be the affordability police? And is that really, in a lot of this work going forward, that for me was the key to it. So I guess that was the blockage to stop this. So I want to know how we can.
So through the chair, so inclusionary zoning is of some type is probably the only regulatory mechanism we have, and the rest of the mechanisms cost money in some form of investment or another. So unfortunately, Alina from DPO is kind of the expert on how all the affordable housing worked through the HASHA legislation. She is unfortunately not available today, but she will be providing her advice with Phil in the report on inclusionary zoning and how things have gone in November. So that's why Phil isn't as expert as Alina on how Hobsonville has worked. But as you know, holding the affordability
that's the key to it, isn't it? You can do it, but then you've got to hold it in time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. And Councillor Bartley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the public forum talked about doing, looking at the immediate need or something because of COVID. What COVID has highlighted is what we already know, and what screams out to me in the report is Māori and Pasifika. I'm wanting to know, with the Forward Work Program, how can we really target Māori and Pasifika? Like really, is it a resolution that we do that now for the work program, or how do we do that?
So through the chair, so statistically, when you look at those most in need for a lifetime of need around the life cycle, so if we talk about those who are elderly and where the deepest need is in that, actually statistically it is Māori and Pasifika. So not all of those who are elderly are in need for elderly housing, but when you look down into the statistics, that's where the greatest need is, and that is often across the housing market. But one of the things you'll see in the paper, so we have done the research we were asked to do previously, which is to bring back more information about the intermediate housing market and who's experiencing it. So there's really lots of different levels, but because often Māori Pasifika are the most in need, then you're seeing central government funding being highly targeted because they do targeted funding rather than universal. And you'll see Māori Pasifika are getting and picking up many of the affordable housing products that are available, whilst other of those who are in need who are picking up more Kiwi Build and other financial levers. So there is a mix of levers. The thing is that there is, like in most things in New Zealand, more need than funding through central government for this level. So, if you look at social housing, because this is a continuum, so where you have pressure on social housing, then that pushes pressure into the rental market. And so when you look at where pressure is for social housing, then that pressure is on Māori and Pasifika, generally single mums, 24 and under with 3 children. And so that's, statistically where the real need is, and that pushes all the way through the market. So it's the same with homelessness. The highest numbers of homeless are Māori and Pasifika. You'll see we were also asked to look at the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan around the items that the Independent Māori Statutory Board has in that plan, and we have looked at that and put them in here for Māori, but it is, need is great in the Māori Pasifika ethnicities and in the places where they congregate the most.
If I could ask again, please, Mr. Chair, so what can we do about it?
I suppose it's all about what levers council wants to use and what costs it wants to place. So as you've heard, inclusionary zoning is a lever, but none of these levers come without great costs and great benefits. If you want to use additional land that council might hold for other purposes for this purpose, or you've contemplated using council land for homelessness before, and when making the decision on actually where we're going forward for affordable housing, it has generally been decided that you don't want to use council land in total for this. You kind of made a decision to kind of lead on some of the levers around the things that are in the work program. So we are getting to that point where to take things further, you're talking about perhaps LTP business plans or really funding the planning team to go through quite a hard and laborious plan process where they would need to be well funded to go through all the steps of that process. So I know it's a story you won't want to keep hearing, but we are on reduced budgets and reduced FTE, and generally there is not new money. So the work program represents the best levers for council to contribute to solving the problem, not on their own, but to make a contribution within the budgets and levers we currently have, subject to, though, the 2 additional papers coming in November.
Okay, I still want to do something about it, and I'm guessing that other councillors will want to support doing something as well. What if we did something with central government, because they have the money and we don't, but it's Auckland, you've already done the research on this, you already know what the issues are, and we lead some kind of a targeted housing program for vulnerable communities and get them on board to, you know, when we need the money.
So through the chair, the planning committee already approved a joint partnership with government on these issues in 2016 as well. So at the same meeting that this work came from, you agreed a joint work program with central government. And so you will see in the attachment some of the complementary initiatives that government have been undertaking, and we are trying to work in a complementary way. You'll see at a ground level, Pānuku, Kāinga Ora, working together, working with community groups, working with Māori groups to try and form partnerships to actually deliver affordable housing on the ground.
Thank you. There needs to be a lot more. I think this is something that this political working group can pick up as well. And I can see that you are thinking exactly that, Councillor Bartley. Can I just, I think we need to including 2 further councillors. Was that your intention, Councillor Bartley? Was yourself and 2 further councillors and an independent Māori statutory board? I'm just quizzing the motion at the moment, which is a good one. Is there anybody in the local boards that we could tap into? Would there be a willingness to identify a local board member as well?
No, I think we start with this and we, you know, and then we just keep it open and branch out when we need to, but
you can do
we need to
that.
get moving, especially if it was 2016 where we already identified it in planning committee, and, you know, yeah, we'll just get it, push it along.
No, I think this is a good move. It does need more deliberate political intervention and leadership. So thank you, Councillor Bartley. Councillor Cashmore, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the Mayor basically asked my question, but I take the cautionary note that Phil Reid gave. He actually answered the question I asked at the workshop around the Unitary Plan Commissioners and why they removed the inclusionary bit from it. And I think Councillor Cooper's point is wise. I also get what Councillor Bartley is saying, and that, you know, we do have a real, very need for additional housing, but Auckland Council's ability to fund that is basically non-existent unless we leverage a whole lot of extra fundraising, which is basically going to be, you know, very politically challenging. So my question, I guess, is to Megan, is that, okay, Megan, with the budget constraints we've got, and that might not be over yet, what is the work potential to be done post-November when we've looked and served out the papers as far as we go? Because the next stage is where the rubber hits the road or the hammers hit the wood. That's going to be the hard part. So I'd like to know whether we are actually, you know, barking at the wind here a bit because of our constraints, or is there something real that we can achieve? Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you for that question. And look, Kataraina really referenced that too in the previous questions. There will be a point quite quickly, and November will start it really, where if the council wants to pull different levers and actually invest in some of these other issues, whether it's inclusionary zoning or additional provision, whether that's provision by council or providing funding to others, whatever that might look like, that absolutely will require funding, and it's funding that is not allocated to it at the moment. So this is not going to be easy. It will effectively be a prioritisation type conversation that this council will need to have if that is the direction that you want to go. So you're quite right, Deputy Mayor. We are doing what we can within the budgets, whether it's advocacy, doing research, all of this good things. But very quickly there will come a time, if you want to do more, then it's going to cost.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Walker, please. A question?
Sure. I've got a combination of half a dozen questions and comments.
I can't take half a dozen questions, Councillor
They're
Walker.
all-
Can
they're
you
all
bring it
related.
back to 3, please?
I'll do the best I can. So the reason that Hobsonville works is because they own the land and they control the development, which is precisely what we could do. I've got a number of questions, a few of them. We glossed over value uplift. I'd like to know where that examination sits, not just as it goes to potential funding for housing, but funding for a number of issues, because we continue to lose many, many millions of dollars a year in the potential of value uplift. So I'd just like to know where that examination is at, whether or not there is any further work occurring there, or whether or not we've just given up on it. Don't need that answer now. I just note in terms of sales process, and that referred to the feedback we had yesterday, that there doesn't appear to be any checklist around inclusionary notions in sale around affordable housing. So I just wonder whether we're looking at that in terms of properties that we're actually selling. And of course, once we've sold all of these properties, that lever won't exist anyway. So I've got a question mark over that. Just a suggestion, and that's why we don't actually generate some pilots ourselves. Why not actually do something in Waiheke as some form of private-public partnership? What resourcing we can apply to that. And that might also involve doing the sorts of things that other cities do around developments that are also environmentally sustainable and climate resilient as benchmarks. And what benchmarking we're doing around this issue generally. So I guess in summary, Mr. Chair, it's pretty clear that after 10 years we haven't made much progress on this. And unless we actually have some substantial commitment, I question whether we're going to have any progress going forward.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Look, the points you made, the questions, I think if we leave those with the staff, and they will go before Councillor Bartley's political working group as well. I think it was an interesting point you raised about a pilot, for example. There were some interesting nuggets in there that we will explore. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson?
Actually, I won't ask the question, Mr. Chair. I'll just wait and make a few comments at the appropriate time, I think.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Dalton? Councillor Dalton, are you with us? We might come back to Councillor Dalton.
I am here. I'm sorry, I couldn't find my mute button. Really nothing, just the comments that I've put in the box at the moment. I'm listening. The separate conversation is I'm just trying to get my head around Waiheke's mandate to continue down the path that they are, but that's not for this, I don't think. And thank you for the papers, Pippa.
Councillor Dalton, do you want to go through the comments in the box? I don't have that in front of me, you see. I'm not sure about others in the room. Those online will be able to see them. Do you want to just reiterate any key points?
My comment was that I was agreeing with Bill. I can understand the levers that we have, that we can control over helping work towards affordable housing. I'm not sure how far we can go in terms of what Wayne was just talking about, of doing pilots, of more investment. I'm conscious of our priorities that we have agreed to. I know we're going into a long-term plan. Those priorities might change. But in terms of being a housing developer, if that's where we're heading, I'm just not sure that we can do that. But we've got partnerships that we can leverage, support, even lead on some of the changes. And I'm just not quite sure that we can go too much further than that, given our current and future priorities in terms of the housing aspect. Those were my comments. I'll keep listening, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton, and thank you for outlining those points that you've just made. Now, look, there's another motion here that the Deputy Mayor and the Deputy Chair and the Mayor have been working up. We're just finalising that, but I'll hand back to the Mayor, who's got a further question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Look, I take on board what Katarina has said. We've got to have a reality check on this. Anything that we do in housing, if we're the developer, and Angela Dalton just mentioned it, is really expensive and we don't have the money. We don't have the checkbook, so let's not be dreamers about it. My question, first, and then a brief comment on the recommendation C on our resolution. The question is about the use of surplus land, and we've got it written into the paper, Katarina. And I know that's been a call from the affordable housing people that were online this morning with us, and also the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan. But what I've never seen quantified is how much surplus land for this purpose we've actually got. And I don't know whether we've, I presume that it's relatively small, and it's even smaller because the emergency budget has agreed that we're going to sell $244 million worth. And if we don't sell that, we've got a real problem because we don't have an alternative supply of money. So just for that reality check, how much surplus land have we actually got that could be used for the purpose of affordable housing? And what would be the sum of money that it would effectively cost us if it was available for that rather than for a contribution to the emergency budget?
So just a couple of points. Of course, none of this work program is intended to apply to the decisions you're already trying to make on the $240 million of surplus land. So I'd like the chair of the Finance Committee to hear me say that. This is about the future, but there are two things that do link to Councillor Walker's questions and Councillor Dalton as well. So one is we will get an up-to-date briefing to all councillors on value uplifts. So both Phil from Planning and the Chief Economist have been working a lot on value uplift, and we can make sure you get that. But there are opportunities. There are small opportunities, and it just depends. So when you look at the potential for Māori land, they'll often identify land, and then we will come and assess it and look at a range of issues. Now, what the work program signals, it signals to all council staff like myself who assess land to see what it should be used for, whether it could be disposed of, that affordable housing is now a consideration with the other considerations that we need to look at when surplus land becomes available. So I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but in a way it is. It means we do look at that in the future and go, yes, if it's no longer needed for this purpose, could it be good for this purpose? So we don't have an exact quantum on all of that, but it does mean it's a now consideration. And to be fair, Pānuku has been doing some brilliant pilots. They are in the back of the report, and Pānuku often is the first cab off the rank knowing where surplus land would be and whether it's of the size or the location in relationship to kāinga order or partnerships with iwi and other providers. So Brenna is online and can provide you additional contextual information about how those pilots work and their relation to surplus land or land that is good for these types of partnerships.
Brenna, are you with us? You might want to take us over Barracliff, for example, I gather.
Yes, I am online, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
We are with you.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. And really going first to the question that the Mayor posed earlier about the quantum. I guess we've worked out, looking at the Pānuku program and the surplus land that has already been approved for disposal, we think it could deliver approximately 11,000 homes over about 10 years. Obviously, that needs to be a mix of housing types. And as you know, in each location, we try and work towards residential choices, social, affordable and market housing. The Barracliff example is a great case study where the land was sold to the New Zealand Housing Foundation and Te Akitai, where they are delivering 340 plus homes, which are a mix of typologies. They're duplexes and townhouses and terraces and so on, but there's also a mixture of tenure as well. So there's some Kiwi build in there and some shared ownership opportunities. It's also in a location where some of the housing is slightly more affordable. So I think the important thing is that council is using this lever. We are undertaking partnerships with Kāinga Ora, with community housing providers, with iwi and others to provide a mix of housing and to facilitate housing choices. We share that pipeline of opportunities with the community housing providers and with iwi and have an open door for ideas to come forward. And I think councillors will remember that we've been trying to advance a pilot project for the C40 climate project in Henderson. I'm not sure how it's actually progressing, but Barracliff and the C40 project are examples of the kind of pilots and test cases we can do.
Thank you so much. Now, I've got a question from Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. Has Council done any work to allow for high-quality prefabricated houses? That's the houses that have been built outside and overseas. Like we just mentioned, have recently seen at Hubbardsville Point. What are the current barriers to this type of development? Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you. I think we can refer that on to Marguerite Pearson. Marguerite, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here. Through the chair, I'm not an expert in modular, but I can provide some comments. So the issue is for building inspectors to be able to carry out their compliance checks, and so when it's off-site overseas, they often can't do those inspections, and so the modular rely on MB approvals. So there are some companies that have that, and I believe that's the Hobsonville company, the ones that were installed in Hobsonville recently, so that those approvals are through MB, and there are a couple of others that are being investigated through building consents, and there's modular companies in New Zealand as well, so again they're easier to be checked, and we just have to follow that building code and the MB's advice on that. Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you, Marguerite. Councillor Young, it's Megan Tyler here. Look, just adding, just specifically from council's perspective, Marguerite's right. It is about being able to inspect and be sure about the materials and the way in which the materials have been constructed and used, and that's always the difficulty that government has been having with the modular industry. And so certainly as council, Ian McCormick and a couple of others have been to China and other places over the previous years to try and ensure that we know exactly what the pipeline of materials comes through from China and other sectors, and Ian is working at a government level or national level with MB colleagues around all of this work as well. So it's quite complex, but it is working through the process with government.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you for that question, Councillor Young. Now, do I have a question or comment from Councillor Casey? Councillor Casey, are you with us?
Mine's a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, look, and I think Councillor Watson, yours is a comment as well. Member Namani, do you have a question?
No, it was going to be more of a comment, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Just a question from me. There is a risk of not having enough staff resource here, which you've identified on page 21. That's one for all of us around this table to be aware of. That's the product of the decisions that we've been making.
Through the chair, actually that risk is about the current work program and further reductions that are required in the future of this financial year. So this work program is based on what the budgets and staff levels are now. So as you're aware, they still do need to come down more, but we will come back to the committee if future organisational changes impact the delivery of the current work programme.
Okay, well, you're going to have to let us know. I'm sure you would, Katarina. You'll have to be upfront about that. We're the ones in charge of it, so we're the only ones that can make a difference in that area. Now, the further motions there from the Mayor and Councillor Bartley, they reiterate a lot of the things that we're already doing, but the things that are not resolved, so we have to keep banging the table. And that's about the briefing papers to the incoming ministers and the Romans 1 to 4 there, members. So if you can keep an eye on that. Can you be thinking about your availability? Councillor Bartley is looking for 2 other councillors and an independent Māori Statutory Board member. Member Namani will leave the independent Māori Statutory Board naming to you and your colleagues, and you can come back to us. But members, can you please,
Yeah, I've got
Councillor Cooper's interested. Are there other councillors? Councillor Casey, are you interested in working with Councillor Bartley in this political working group?
You betcha.
You betcha, you're in. Look, I'm sure Councillor Bartley doesn't want to exclude anybody else, so that's our 2, but are there others that would like to participate?
Perhaps they can just email. It's all right. We can carry on.
Just let's email interest to Councillor Bartley, please. So we've got 2 names there. Can we change that from 2 further councillors to the names, please? Thank you, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Casey. Just a question from me. Or maybe it's a comment. I was a bit surprised to see this increase in the 50 to 64-year-olds in the intermediate housing market category. I was thinking, it's got to be younger demographic that I'll be reading, but I was quite surprised. Is that a recent development that 50 to 64 age group has shown up? How does that compare with, say, 3 years ago?
So, through the chair, these are an update, so they are using the available 2018 census data that we have. You will notice in the report we talk about one portion of that group on the increase, which is there is an increase in older, and some of them, a large portion, well not a large portion, but a portion of them are older women who are recently separated. And that has a big impact on their ability to find housing. But we do have a full report, like very full report of all the breakdown of this. And so as not to overburden the agenda, we have noted we will send you all these via memo before your next meeting. So you can have the full data analysis of all the breakdowns of all the different groups and demographics identified in here. But it is a growing group, and as is the professional sector is one of the biggest growing groups, and the other one is young families. So they are growing since the last census data.
And those in the intermediate housing market are moving house and suburb and school and everything else that goes with it more than twice as often as the balance of the market.
Yes, and it's particularly dependent on the market, so that the more renters in the market, the more expensive houses are to buy, the more readily landlords in the past, before the recent changes to the Tenancy Act, could put up rents because they know they've got queues of people waiting to rent their properties. So we are still, the chief economist, of course, has been advising us on what the impact of COVID might be, particularly things like Airbnb rentals that might now come on the market. But his advice to us, and he is online as well, is that he doesn't believe COVID's going to have a significant impact in terms of, at this stage, making houses that much more affordable for those in the intermediate housing market. So he is also online if you want to hear more about the economics of that.
Okay, and my other question related in some part to the contributions that we've had from under the public forum today. We've had 6 really solid contributions, and I'm really just so delighted to see that willingness to grapple this issue with us. And under the Forward Work Programme, under Attachment A, we are having those pre-application meetings, and we're discounting costs there. I thought pre-application meetings were no-cost meetings anyway. They are actually charged now, are they? Okay, so we're discounting that. The earlier motions were about making also grants available. So are we sort of seeing that as a quasi grant by discounting? I was quite surprised at the range of community housing providers and other groups there are working in this space. They've come in from Queenstown and all across the place today. And is there opportunity to maybe broaden our reach and understand all these various entities even more? Or is it just the politicians that don't quite understand it because we're not exposed to it? You are fully abreast as officers of all these different structures and tools that are, and financial incentives that are being used right around the nation?
So through the chair, so it is a housing system and it's quite complex, so not a single one of our staff members know it all. What we do know is between the collective across the council whānau, we have talked to lots of different types. We have looked at many overseas models. They can be quite complex, and the legislative levers they have overseas compared to actually what you have as a local government in New Zealand are quite different. So, you know, we've got experts in council who have contributed to this who do understand that full range. We've had staff use annual leave and go to Queenstown, and on annual leave they've gone and done the tours, they've talked to the trust, they've looked at the examples in Hamilton, they've looked at the examples in Wellington. It is an overwhelming amount of information. A lot of it is in this agenda, but we recognise that that perhaps through the working group or other forum, we can transfer some of that knowledge that's held amongst many staff to elected members, so we are all growing and learning. But generally, council staff are talking to lots of people all the time.
Thank you, and I'm sure Councillor Bartley's group will tap into that resource that's been offered here today through the public forum. And so the body of work that's going to be coming up, that the political working group is going to be guiding, is the inclusionary zoning, increasing the housing stock. We'll be exploring that. We'll be looking at alternative financing. It's that category under further work. I think the SOI has already been adjusted to reflect our desire for Panuku and others, well, primarily Panuku, to look at affordable housing. That's already been done, hasn't it, Karaina?
Yes, at some level it has, but we do think we could look at it a little bit more. But as Panuku is great in reminding us, they are actually leveraging a lot for outcomes for this program out of their existing business. But in conversation, if we wanted to scale up some of those pilots that they're starting to have success with, then of course that would be a SOI uplift with a funding uplift. So it's just not cutting off the conversation completely, because as Panuku does more and learns more, it's an acknowledgement that elected members here might want to commission more from them, and SOIs is a way to commission and fund that.
Okay, thank you. I think we've exhausted all the questions, and now I have some comments. Councillor Casey, would you like to lead off, please?
Yeah, I'd love to lead off. Oh, I just can't tell you how, you know, some days in local government are better than others, and this is one of the really good days. And I'm just loving what I'm hearing Katarina saying. I'm loving, Councillor Darby, that you and Councillor Bartley have put this centre stage and that Councillor Bartley is going to champion it. Thank you to the Mayor for supporting it. Look, I've been around a long time, and I remember the Bill Birch report of 2001 that recommended to that Auckland City Council that they divest themselves of their assets, and the 1,600 pensioner units went out the door for some $75 million. We've been at a standstill on housing for older people ever since. And I've had immense debates over the years in all kinds of forums. And what has changed today is that this council is welcoming of more intervention. Because it wasn't just that John Banks paying his debt. I think it was $125 million at the time. It wasn't just debt payoff. It was a philosophical objection to the involvement of councils in the provision of housing. And that has changed. What I sense now is that we welcome more intervention. In fact, we're leading it. And I know there's a cost, and there will be a debate about how much of that intervention we do because of the cost of it. I understand that. But when people look at short-sighted ideas to pay off debt, like selling pensioner housing, airport shares in the ports of Auckland, you can see how long it takes to recover from that. 20 years on. And here we are, we've had not one single new unit of pensioner housing added on to our existing stock. We are an age-friendly city. One of the central tenets of that is to have a range of affordable housing that allows people to age in place. Accessibility is really important to that too, so let's not forget that. So just a great day. I'm really loving it. I've loved all the presentations. Josephine, Bartley, I will be there when you need me. I'll do anything I can to make this happen, and I'll fight for it till I've got my last breath. But it's been 20 years, and it's been a long time coming. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Councillor Watson, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me all right? I've been having a bit of trouble with my link here. Is that all right?
Nice and clear, we have you.
Yeah, okay. I'm not quite as upbeat as Councillor Casey over the general scenario that's painted with the housing. Clearly, all the statistics and trends we're seeing are showing that the situation's getting worse. More people are now being presented with a housing dilemma, and with all the social and economic downside of that goes with us, yet we seem to be kind of stuck in this kind of time warp. And I say that because if we look at the opportunity as far as inclusionary zoning goes, for instance, it was presented to us back in the unitary plan when we had the opportunity to require developers to include at least 10% affordable homes. That was voted down, and we were told at the time that the panel had accepted arguments by such luminaries as Housing New Zealand that the most appropriate way for the plan to address housing affordability is by enabling a significant increase in residential development capacity and a greater range of housing sizes and types. Well, we've had that now, Mr. Chair, for 4 years, coming up for nearly half a decade, and there has been no improvement. In fact, it's got worse. So the housing typologies, the kind of terraced housing, they're all up 800, 900, a million, 1.2, 1.3 in these big new subdivisions that are occurring all around Auckland. So it hasn't worked. The Hasher legislation has been pretty that we bought into big time in this council from 2013 through to 2016 has been pretty roundly dismissed. If you look at researchers like Kay Saville Smith and her paper doing with the revitalising the production of lower value homes, pointed out that they had the special housing areas that have been established have generated low numbers of dwellings, most of which are not affordable for those middle and low income households, most burdened by unmet housing supply. The stats on those stopped pretty early on in the piece from the council, so it'd be useful to get a an update on how they've actually panned out, actually how many affordable homes have come out of that. Someone mentioned Hobsonville earlier in the piece. Again, there is a general sense that that's worked okay, but we don't have any figures. So it'd be nice to have figures there, and certainly the developers or the builders, the special homes or the lower affordable homes, they were reduced in size. So they're able to do it. They were able to do it okay. Like any developer will find a way to do something, but there's a quid pro quo. And in Hobsonville, it was a reduced size of home, but it was an affordable home. What quantum there is of that in that development, as I said, would be very interesting to know. What really disturbs me, though, Mr. Chair, in all of this, is that through people like Kay Saville-Smith, we've got a very clear idea of why we're in the situation we're in now. If you take a historical look at New Zealand since the 1960s, where the kind of houses in the lower two quartiles of value have dropped away virtually in the 90s to virtually to nothing, to virtually, well, the government assistance to those sort of housing essentially dropped away to nothing. And if we look around all around Auckland, you will see big subdivisions that were living examples of the government capital assistance that occurred at that time to the community through capitalisation of family benefits and provision of mortgage assistance and things like that. And that was the primary mechanism by which the building industry was attracted to produce dwellings in lower quartiles of value, and that followed a similar uptake in the public state housing sector. So we've seen what's happened historically. We have seen that the building industry follows the money naturally. They go to the upper quartiles, and that has exacerbated, particularly in Auckland, since the 1990s, but since the super city advent, it's gone through the roof. So I agree with the mayor. Our capacity as a council to do, to really be a particularly active partner, this is incredibly constrained. That's just the reality. But what I think we do have a capacity to do is to perhaps promote some pilots to show how it can be done. So we get some sort of return to that balance of lower quartile construction that so characterised our country, and Auckland in particular, through the 60s and 70s, and then virtually ground to a halt. To me, that's the challenge. So instead of Panuku doing these kind of, as happened in my ward, sort of nondescript little expensive private housing schemes, such as happened up in Whangaproa, what could have been a park and ride site, and the houses going for 800, 700, 800,000. Why not do a small pilot where we cover our costs and we show how affordable housing can be delivered, and we lean on the expertise of people who are in that sector, the people we heard today, and show how it can work, and then lobby the government, because this is a central government problem. It's worst in Auckland. They're the ones that have to come with the solution. Thus far, they haven't, but that's not to say we can't be a lot more active than we are and actually showing them how it can be done. And I think we've got the capacity to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. And I think the motion C addresses the points that you make in the latter part of your contribution here. If I can just reflect on the Hasher, Councillor Watson, I have asked for some data on the number of affordable dwellings delivered under Hasher. It's a near impossible task, and I don't think you will actually find a number of any significance at all. It will be a very low number, if there is a number at all. But I'm happy to pursue that with you offline. I asked that question over a year ago. There were so many outs on that legislation that led to very low deliverability of affordable product. But I think you know that, I think most of us know that the Hasher legislation did not deliver on affordability, even though it was supposed to deliver on supply and affordability. But happy to have a further discussion with you on that, Councillor Watson. Can I now go to Member Namani? Member Namani, are you with us?
Yes, kia ora.
Kia ora.
There's a lot to get through here, so I'm just trying to make my comment, I think, as succinct and simple as I can. I've been hearing all the kōrero around all the options, all the initiatives, the good and bad, and I think from where I stand, I think one of the important matters, and the Deputy Chair did underline it, is don't forget your treaty partners, don't forget the opportunities that come your way when you engage in a real way with mana whenua, mātā waka, not only mana whenua, mātā waka, but in particular Māori service providers, social service providers, housing providers, as we move towards looking at what the solutions might be for tāmaki. I often get fearful when I hear about surplus council land initiatives coming out that haven't got iwi or Māori at the heart of it. And I'm not saying they haven't. I guess there's such a complex array of models and pilots out there, but I would like to ensure that there's a filter test across all of this, that Māori are engaged in finding the solutions alongside council. And I think if we look at the coming out of the phase of the special housing, the whole SHA phase, who ended up delivering on affordable housing in that, despite all the complexities? It was Māori. So I think that's really what I'm stressing. As the Independent Māori Statutory Board, we're supportive of the forward work program. We think it gives enough space and context to have these conversations, in addition to the political working group that will add value to that. And also it's aligning to the Kāinga strategic action plan, which was in some respects our response, having listened to Māori in Auckland in terms of what their needs were. So we're carefully looking alongside that whatever council does is lining up with where we think the opportunities lie to resolve the housing issues in Auckland. But yeah, that's probably just the comment I make. In all the midst of the complexity, don't forget the most, I guess, the most enduring partners that exist, and that is Māori and mana whenua. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Kia ora, Leanne. Councillor Henderson, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to quickly acknowledge the community housing providers that have spoken to us today, and just add that we've got a fantastic trust in my ward called Vision West, and I want to thank you guys as well for all the great work you do. Just also want to thank the Chair and Deputy Chair and the Mayor for giving this resolution some red meat. I think B and C are fantastic, it looks great, and I'm really happy to support it. Let's be clear here, as a number of submitters have said, that housing is a human right. It is a right under Te Reo Waitangi, it is a basic need, it is the foundation of a good life in our city. We must remember, I think, around this table that housing affordability exists on a continuum, or a scale, in other words. We've had runaway house prices for a decade. Those house prices go up mean that people that could have bought now can't and are renting. And so that drives the rent prices up, which means people that were already renting now can't afford to rent. And so that drives our homelessness population up. you know, it's crazy what's been allowed to happen. And it's up to government and to us to fix a problem in partnership. And I'm really glad to see that reflected in that resolution. You know, it's easy for us to sit here and say how important it is in the abstract, but when the rubber meets the road and we need to make decisions on individual sites, that's when we need to be brave. And I really want to acknowledge the emergency budget process around this and how there have been some really brave decisions so far. For some people, they say a big backyard is important to them, and that's fine, but there's an increasing amount of people in our city that don't care about that. They want to be a part of a community, to have an opportunity to own a stake in a community and to put down roots with their families, to have a park nearby, jobs nearby, rapid transit nearby. That's what's really valuable, especially for people that are in their sort of 30, 40, you know, under that kind of years, I'd say. But we have solutions in front of us, and I've heard sort of situations where council is quite constrained, and we do have some constraints. But I want to point out the CCO review, which said, let's give Panuku Development Auckland more resource to sustainably do what they need. And I think the answer for us as a council is looking at our town centres. You know, I represent town centres, Henderson, Glen Eden, where people are 1-story, 2-story, right in the centre of town. It's crazy. It's a crazy use of land. Town centres provide a solution to our problems in housing and in economic development, and it should be our priority to facilitate more development in these town centres. We need to, I think, each of us, think about championing this kind of redevelopment in our towns, saying yes to housing in our existing urban areas, and I think, as Imogen said, being bold and brave, and that's what we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And Councillor Coombe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to speak in support of these resolutions, very wholeheartedly support, and it's fantastic to see this bit of work progressing. I remember also that it wasn't that long ago that to talk about council and housing, it was almost an allergic reaction. And we've kind of come from that history where there was a real pushback on council being involved in affordable housing. But when you look at all the levers that we're hearing, and there's a huge number of levers, we're hearing that it's a whole spectrum of tools that council has available, and we're involved in all sorts of ways, whether we like it or not, whether it's rating, consenting, zoning, all have an impact on affordable housing. So we really need to, I really support us stepping up and claiming the space. And what I'm hearing is that we can fire on a whole lot of levers. And a few comments I just wanted to make is I think I can understand the concerns about saying council shouldn't be a developer, we shouldn't finance, we shouldn't operate affordable housing. Well, we don't actually have to do any of those things to be part of the space of affordable housing and to make a difference, because there's a whole lot of other stuff we can do. And I mean, I'm just hearing about new things just from the presentations we had this morning, which were fantastic. So I really, you know, just in terms of the value uplift, which I imagine the horses bolted on huge amounts of land, that we should have been tapping into that upzoning and the value uplift. But we can still move into that area and make sure we tap into the funding that's available. One area that hasn't been mentioned in the surplus land, I don't think we should ever call it surplus, there's no such thing as really surplus land, all the land is valuable, is about the brownfield sites. And just in my ward, or the fringes of my ward, if you look at Mount Eden Station, there's going to be 100,000 square metres of development land. That is, the ownership there is at least a combination of council and government. Just removing the Dominion Road flyover, we're going to have 2 to 3 hectares of development land. Grafton Gully, the boulevard that is now a new project in the city centre master plan, releases hectares of land. So we haven't even touched on how we might be a partner in the development of that. And yes, a lot of the value from those sort of developments might go to funding the investment in transport projects, but we've absolutely got to be ready to step in to be able to partner and to use the tools that we have. And I think in the past, council has not been able to do that because we've just operated on the periphery, and we haven't really been aware of how we can best make use of brownfield sites. So I would absolutely hope that can be part of the mix, and that's why I really want to support the working group idea. And I'm glad that just remember Namame's comments around partnering and the opportunities for partnering with Māori and Matawaka and Māori providers and groups, because that's a whole other space that wasn't around so much 10 years ago, that council wasn't so aware of or tapped into. So a whole lot of things there that I think need to be taken forward that I really support, and I really hope that we can look at really firing up all of our tools, all of our levers, and really maximising the opportunities for developing affordable housing in Auckland, because as we've heard, it is a human right. It's fundamental under the treaty, and so thank you for this opportunity to speak and support, and thank you for all the work from the officers in bringing it to us. And I really would like to support the kaupapa and the mahi going forward. Kia ora.
And now call upon Mayor Goff, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Critical to our vision of being an inclusive city has to be our ability to meet the needs of people for housing. And what we're focused on today in this paper is a group called the Intermediate Housing Market. It's a bit of a label that nobody probably understands what it means, so let's say what it is. These are the people, they're not eligible for social housing, they're stuck in the private rental sector, and the private rental sector just about drains them of every surplus dollar that they have. So they're immediately unable to save the money for a deposit to buy a home, but they would love to have a home of their own. And for a lot of people in that area, their one source of salvation is the bank of mum and dad. Yeah, that's how my kids got into their home, all three of them, because they had a mum and dad that had the resources to help them. But not everybody is in that situation, and that immediately makes us a less equitable society, because those that don't have a mum and dad with any money, and that will be also disproportionately affecting our Māori and Pacifica community, they're locked out of the housing market forever. So what we're trying to do is to tackle that problem. Now, is council powerless to do anything? The answer is no. We've heard from Panuku that they have plans to develop housing over the next 10 years for up to 11,000 households. And I'd really like Panuku actually to provide our council with the details of that. You know, and we all know about Barracliff. I've visited there, 340, I think it is, houses. Great. Working with the community housing providers, that's great too, and hope they can do more of that. But I really want to see that that's not just a pipe dream, that 11,000 houses, but it's something that is achievable. Secondly, we've got instruments ourselves. One, continually improving our consenting process to keep costs down, to do it more quickly. Secondly, to make sure that we are zoning, and the unitary plan did this to a large extent, so that there's an adequate supply of land for development. That also keeps prices down. And the third thing is providing infrastructure, and we can be proud that in the emergency budget we did keep $2.6 billion into infrastructure provision, a lot of it which will feed directly into facilitating housing. But let's come to the crunch point. We don't have a checkbook to develop housing ourselves or to own large groups of housing ourselves. So it has to be a partnership with the government. And we're doing that partly through the Auckland Housing Program, 20 to 30,000 houses developed, particularly in places like Mount Roskill and Mahere. And we need to keep that up. We need to keep pressure on the government on social housing. They're doing 3,000 to 4,000 houses in Auckland in the next term, but that won't be enough. So we need to keep advocating for that. But what we also have to do, I think, are the things that I've set out in recommendation C there. We actually want to have inclusionary zoning. We know that it can work and you can meet the sort of questions that Councillor Cooper quite rightly provided. We're not about providing a windfall profit for somebody by giving them a house that's cheaper than the value on the market and then they can do the capital gain thing. We're not about that at all. But we do want to have inclusionary zoning, and I believe that it can work, and we need legislation from them on that. We need to also look at what we can do to facilitate private sector involvement. Most landlords in New Zealand are mum and dad landlords, and they're not generally that good and professional at what they do. They mean well, but they don't provide, they generally got 1 or 2 or 3 houses maximum. What we need is that professional investment you're seeing overseas in countries like the States and Germany and the United Kingdom, build to rent. So we really want the government to start to deliver on incentives to build to rent. And then the last thing that I'm just going to mention, because I'm almost out of time, we put a lot of work in. Now, those that are online can't see this, but this is the Merrill Housing Report. I think it was a damn good report. Councillor Darby was on it with me and Deputy Mayor Cashmore. And one of the things we said we can do a lot more of, including Councillor Paul Young's talk about prefabricated housing, is to improve the housing code, the building code and the Building Act. The government's made a start on it, but we need them to go further and we need them to go faster. So what I'm saying, and together with Councillor Bartley and Chair Darby, is we actually need the government, the incoming minister, to focus at least on those 4 things, and we could probably add another half dozen. But let's focus on those 4 things. That's where government can deliver to facilitate what we can do to help those intermediate market housing people that desperately want the security and stability of a home they can call their own, but can't do it in the current market. So I commend those recommendations to the committee.
Thank you, Mayor. And Councillor Cooper.
I think everybody's summed up what I said, what I wanted to say, and I just think it is about how we keep that affordable housing stream affordable over time, and I'm really looking forward to the report back to see how we can do that.
Thanks, Councillor Cooper. Look, I was really touched by the contributors here today, as Councillor Henderson reminded us. Councillor Bartley, did you want to say something?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I still feel like we need something in here about Māori and Pacific, because it's been highlighted in the report as the most affected and vulnerable. And I know there was something that this committee did in 2016, which was before my time, which doesn't seem like the committee has progressed since it was raised. But I'm just wondering how we can address that point, because it's still sitting there like a boil that we haven't even touched.
We're going to have to pick that up in your working party then, because we've now gone through the questions, we've gone through the speaking rights, so it's very late to actually go and put up another motion. So I think we'll just have to trust that your working party will pick that focus up. Member Namani has reminded us of that, and other speakers as well. So I think we just have to let that be where it is at the moment. It's just a bit late in the proceedings. Look, at the outset, I think it was Tom Gill talked about peace, security and dignity, and those words have really stuck in my mind, and I'm sure others as well. And I know you don't find that when you have to move yourself, your family, possibly every 2.5 years is what families or individuals in that intermediate housing market are finding themselves. On the move, schools, workplaces, all those relationships you build in your community on the move every 2.5 years. You don't find it living in a garage. Imogen Schott, Councillor Henderson reminded us of those comments from Imogen Schott as well, to be brave and bold. We might have lost the inclusionary zoning challenge, a few years back, but look, that was a few years back. Let's get better prepared. Let's get our evidence together. Let's go again. I would say let's not walk away from that one. And I hope, I'm sure the political advisory group will look at that very, very hard. The security and dignity and peace that Tom Gill reminds us of does have some of its foundations, at least, in having a secure and affordable home. And the situation in Auckland has become absolutely chronic. It is dangerously chronic, and it is a great dislocator of society, and it's one that this council has to take on. I know that a lot of work has been done, but look, we're now in a COVID world, and if there's any one thing I've learned is that innovation has to come to the fore, and research has to come to the fore, and development out of that research has to come to the fore. So let's embrace all of that. There's been some enormous contributions, both public and from our elected members here today. Let's build on that. We'll see what the political working party led by Councillor Bartley delivers to us later in the year, working with our staff and those many contributors that have appeared before us and others that are going to build the solution for us. Thanks to everybody for your absolute commitment, staff and members here today. I'll put that to the vote then. All those in favour say aye.
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 And to the contrary, no.
Aye.
We've got another aye, thank you, and declare that carried. Now, members, I'm conscious of time. The balance of the agenda, as you've probably read, most are end of process decisions. Would you like to take it's now 12:30, would you like to take a 15-minute break now? Would that suffice? And then we come back and conclude the agenda? Or do you want more of a lunch break? There is no catering in this building. And of course, I'm thinking of our members online as well, who might want to take a half-hour break. Can I just... I'm hearing half an hour. Members online, is it half an hour? Okay, I'll take the silence as half an hour. Mayor doesn't want a break.
Carry on.
There's no
No.
controversy left in this.
No.
Why don't we have a 5-minute break and finish this?
Okay, I'm hearing it's a 5-minute break, refreshment break, and we're back in 5 minutes, members.
Thanks.
Mayoral compromise. we'll reconvene the meeting. We will now go to item 9, which is on page 99, and that's the Auckland Unitary Plan making operative the private plan change 32. This is at the Avondale Jockey Club. Now, I'll just check my notes
I'd like
here.
to move that, Chair.
Tracy, are you online, Tracy?
Yep.
Would you like to move?
Yes, please. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Do I have a second, please? And Councillor Henderson will second. This matter is on page 99, members, and Katie Maxwell is the author of this report. I think this is reasonably straightforward in that it's gone through the process, it removes some land from the Avondale Racecourse precinct. It makes it into terrace housing and apartment building zone. There were just 10 submissions, one further submission, no appeals. Katie, I'm probably doing your work here, but you've done the real hard yards on this. And if you're with us now, Katie, is there anything further you would like to add?
Thank you. No, there is nothing additional to add. You've summarised it very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks for helming that private plan change on behalf of Council. It is moved by Councillor Mulholland, seconded by Councillor Henderson. A question?
It was just a comment, if possible.
Absolutely, Councillor Cooper.
If there's no further, I think what I'm very excited about for Avondale is, as an ex-Waitakere City Councillor, we used to look over that border and see that Avondale was so neglected, like the other edge of Auckland City on the other side, further in the south, and to see what some of these plan changes will enable and really make. I mean, Avondale's it's so close to the city, it's so close to a lot of opportunities, it's got public transport, and now finally we're going to get really good development in Avondale and make it a much better place to live. So I'm very happy to support this, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Mulholland, right in your patch, you're very familiar with this land. Would you like to make a comment?
Yes, thanks. I'd put that in the sidebar. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. So I really believe that a number of people have worked tirelessly to support Avondale and its regeneration. I want to acknowledge that. Thanks, Councillor Cooper, for your comments, but I would say that actually it is progress, significant progress is already underway with approximately 450 new homes, the library and community facility. We have got great progress in the town centre, and good to see that the work that was done last year has been continued, the board has been continued this year for the regeneration of the area. It is a absolute gem, Avondale, and I fully support the work that is being undertaken by all groups there. I do want to acknowledge as well that I have been working very closely with the Jockey Club with regards to seeking their support for some future potential gifting of land, and let's see where we get to on that following a receipt of letter. So I fully support the work that the staff have done. This is sorry, I have a grandfather clock in the background chiming. Sorry if you can hear that. So really, absolutely supportive of the Avondale Jockey Club themselves as an organisation who are very passionate about the area, and I do want to acknowledge them. So thanks, Chair. It is, to me, as was just mentioned by Councillor Cooper, it's a really exciting thing, but the work is already underway, and may we be able to work together in the future with government and with the community to make sure that we get some really good outcomes for the whole of the rest of Avondale. So kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mulholland. There being no further contributions, I'll put that motion, moved by Councillor Mulholland and seconded by Councillor Henderson, the A and the B, making this operative. And all those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. We'll now go to item 10, and this is an end of process also on a council-led change, and this is plan change 34, special character area extension in Howick. Can I call upon Councillor Young to move, or Councillor Stewart to second?
Yes.
Can I take Councillor Young? Councillor Stewart, are you with us? Would you like to second?
Yes, I'd like to move it. I've been around for a long time with this one.
Okay. Councillor Young, are you okay if Councillor Stewart, I heard your...
No problem. No problem.
That's fine. We'll turn that round. Thank you. And Katrina David is our principal planner that has been doing the work on this, and this is a very good outcome, I think. Katrina, well done. Would you like to take us through it briefly, or we take it as read? I think you've got a couple of slides, in fact, haven't you, Katrina?
Kia ora, yes. I've got just one slide up there which I thought might help people understand the context of where this plan change was. So thank you through the chair. This is another end of process for a council initiated plan change 34, which was notified in October last year. And plan change 34 sought to address two matters. The first was to add a special character statement into the unitary plan, and it was the only special character area in the unitary plan special character area in the unitary plan that didn't have a special character statement which set out what the values of the area were. So it was basically a gap that we were seeking to fix. The other matter that the plan change sought to do was to add 4 new sites into the extent of that special character area. So you can see that on the map there. The existing special character area has got the blue dots over the town centre there, and then there's the 4 sites outlined which the plan change sought to add. And the reason that it sought to add those sites was because each of the sites had buildings on them that contributed to those special character values. So a panel of 3 independent hearing commissioners were delegated authority to consider the submissions that were received on the plan change and to make the final decision on it. Now, through the submissions and the hearing process, submitters raised a number of issues, and some of these issues were determined by the independent commissioners in their final decision to be outside the scope of the plan change. For example, some of these sought to extend the special character area much wider over a much wider area and onto the residential and Stockade Hill. So the commissioners released their decision in June of this year, and that decision was to approve the plan change with modifications. Now, those modifications were only to change some of the text of the character statement, and that was to better reflect the special character values of the area. Once the decision was released, there was an appeal period and no appeals have been received. Therefore, we're now at that end of stage process for this plan change, and we're seeking to make it operative. So happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Katrina. We are end of the process stage. So are there any questions, or should we just go straight to comments? Are there any comments?
Yes.
Is that Councillor Stewart?
It's Sharon here. Yes, I'd just like to thank Katrina in particular, and Celia Davis and John Duguid. This has been a particularly hard plan change, and they've done such a brilliant job having no appeals. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. The motion's before us. It's moved by Councillor Stewart and seconded by Councillor Young. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. To the contrary, no, and declare that carried. Thank you. Thank you, Katrina. And now
thank you, everyone.
We will go to item 11, and this is an interesting paper, members. Tony Reedy is the author of it, and it's great to see some red tape slashed, and appropriately so. And it's a proposed plan change on temporary activities. Look, I'll move the motions that are on page 124. Councillor Cooper, this crosses over into your regulatory area. Would you like to second?
Yes.
Thank you. And Tony, tell us the good news.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mayor and councillors. I've actually has a presentation just to run through quickly, which summarises what the changes are about. And I'll just take you through that. Oh, sorry, I've gone too far. So just in terms of temporary activities, they include festival events, concerts, parades, sporting events, and also filming. And they're managed under both the unitary plan and the trading and events in public places bylaw. That's currently subject to review, the bylaw. There's also the Film Auckland Protocol as well, which provides guidelines on filming activities. So the unitary plan's objectives and policies talk about temporary activities, how they can contribute to a vibrant city and enhance the wellbeing of communities. At the same time, however, the objectives and policies also talk about mitigating adverse effects on amenity values, in particular noise, traffic, communities and the natural environments. Historic heritage places and sites and places of significance to mana whenua. So the plan change doesn't alter these objectives and policies, it just tweaks the standards in a couple of areas. And those areas are to make it a bit easier for event organisers to put on events without having to go through a resource consent, and I'll touch on those areas shortly. So we've had a number of issues raised by a couple of council departments and also ATEED in terms of the temporary activity standards, that they're overly onerous in a couple of areas and they're triggering the need for these resource consents. There was another issue raised in terms of temporary activities on sites and places of significance to mana whenua. At the moment, any temporary activity on such a place is restricted discretionary activity, needs a resource consent. At the same time, we've also identified a gap in the coastal temporary activity provisions in terms of the noise requirements there, and we're using this opportunity just to fill that gap and to tweak another anomaly in the activity table as well. And there was also an issue raised in terms of temporary emergency works, which we feel are adequately covered under the RMA or can be addressed under the review of the RMA in over the next year or two. So that we've come down to two proposed changes to the temporary activity standards and one change, the Pukekohe Park precinct. And so in terms of those standards, the changes, so we're requiring a traffic management plan. A traffic management plan is required already in for an event in a rural or future urban zone where more than 500 vehicles movements are generated. That's tagged to a resource consent requirement, however, so we're removing that resource consent requirement but still having the requirement for a traffic management plan. And so it becomes a permitted activity standard instead of a trigger for a resource consent. So the end result's the same. Also under the bylaw, there's the ability to require a traffic management plan in any case. So there's a little bit of duplication there. In terms of the temporary activity standards themselves, we're increasing the duration of those slightly. Those events that are defined as noise events, that is, they exceed the noise standards for that particular zone from 6 hours to 8 hours. And there's a slight tweak to the Pukekohe Park precinct in terms of Anzac Day, where Anzac Day lands on a Saturday, and that's only once every 6 years with leap year. They would be able to start on a Saturday afternoon. At the moment, the precinct rules out Anzac Day totally, so it gives them half a day on Anzac Day. Again, it's a fairly small change, but it provides a bit more flexibility. And then, as I mentioned, there's two additional minor changes to address some anomalies. That's in the coastal temporary activity provisions and also in the temporary activity table itself. They are outlined in the report. There are a couple of areas we're recommending no change, and that's to the temporary activities on sites and places of significance to mana whenua, and also the temporary emergency works. The former, as I mentioned, requires a restricted activity resource consent, and we believe that's the appropriate process at this point in time. And the latter one, as I mentioned, the review of the RMA is probably the most appropriate forum to address that issue. And that's a brief summary, Mr. Chair, of the changes proposed. I have Marie Jenkins from ATEED listening in as well, and I think Liesl Dawson from ATEED was also going to listen, but she may have another commitment if there are any questions of ATEED.
Okay, thank you. And that's Auckland Transport as opposed to AT. No, you said AT'd.
Yes, AT'd.
Who actually raised some of these issues. I thought you were talking about the traffic management issues and you mentioned AT, but that's fine, that's clear. Are there questions? Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, thank you. And given AT does a Screen Auckland plan, etc., is there any, do they want to comment on this and how it affects our ability to allow filmmaking? Because there have been some issues around that and consenting and plan changes or in the plan and our consenting. So I just guess I want to be reassured that this doesn't hinder our filmmaking ability in Auckland, or whether it makes it better, or is it just neutral? I guess those are my issues.
Tony, I have to go back to you on that because we don't have AT'd on the call.
Okay.
Okay, we don't.
So it improves it for filmmaking, particularly the traffic management plan in rural areas. Often they've advised us with the film crew and the various people involved in filmmaking, you can get over 500 vehicle movements. And at the moment, resource consent would be required. So this enables them to prepare a traffic management plan and to go ahead with the filming without having to go through the resource consent process. They were the ones that raised the issue on sites and places of significance to mana whenua, but we believe the resource consent process is the appropriate process at this point in time. They are sites with multiple values to multiple iwi, and it's difficult through a broad brush plan change to address those sort of issues.
So that would give a bit more discretion around that rather than just one blanket rule on the unitary plan?
There's the opportunity on sites and places of significance to apply for a resource consent, and you can bundle together a number of different activities. So for example, we've used an example of Queen Street, where there is a site of significance along Queen Street. You could prepare a resource consent and cover a number of different temporary activities. So that's probably the most appropriate process.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Are there other questions or comments, members? I just noticed, Tony, reading through it last night, and thank you for the attachments, quite a lot of quite dense information there. Now, you've got a list under paragraph 9, and if I go to the top of 125, I just made this assumption that it included markets, and then I read on to discover that markets are excluded. Why are markets excluded?
When the unitary plan was prepared, that was a deliberate choice to provide them with a separate definition. And therefore take them out of the temporary activities definition. I'm not sure, I can't recall the rationale at that point in time. It was handled by a different person working on the definitions, but we've ended up with markets not being in that definition. So they often provided for separately in the activity tables.
Yeah. So is it onerous for an applicant to set up a market? I mean, is it something that we should have looked at or need to look at?
It hasn't been flagged as an issue, and a lot of the business, it depends where the location of the market is, obviously, but in a lot of the business zones are permitted activities, so it's not an issue there.
Thank you. Good word at that. Just in terms of noise and extending the noise by, what was it, the one or 2 hours?
By 2 hours.
2 hours. And citing packing in and packing out for concerts as a classic example.
Yep.
Packing out, the concerts are turned around almost immediately, like the pack outs happen immediately. The riggers come in and they don't use rubber mallets or anything like that. It's clanky, it's noisy. I'm just thinking of communities. I know that it's recently been highlighted in a resource consent application that's in at the moment and live. I won't go into that detail, but have you taken into account the type of noise that occurs in the pack in and pack out, scaffolding, etc.?
Yes, that's been addressed in Plan Change 14, an earlier plan change, which addressed the pack in and pack out issues, and they've aligned the the construction noise standards to the pack in and pack out now. So they're covered. It's the same standards that would apply to someone constructing a building.
Okay.
Because the pack in and pack out was an issue raised by ATs. Okay. I think it's we've covered that in the report as well.
Now, we do have AT'd, is it Marie on the line?
Marie, yeah.
From AT'd. Would you like to pose your question again, Councillor Cooper?
Hello, I was just asking around the ability, ease of filming, whether these unitary plan changes will address some of Screen Auckland's concerns and maybe the screen industry concerns.
Marie, did you hear that?
Yes, I did. Yep, thank you. Yes, they will address the concerns that we have. Yep. It will go quite, especially the vehicle movements one will really assist a lot of the locations, the rural locations, to get the larger productions in and out more effectively.
And is there anything else that we can do to make this easier? I know sometimes the sign-off in the local areas is tricky. Is there another avenue that needs to be addressed rather than unitary plan change?
In regards to the sign-off for the permit applications?
Yeah, I think that's it, permit. Yeah,
Sorry.
so permit applications,
yeah.
especially for local areas through local boards.
Yeah, I mean, we do have challenges from the film industry in regards to kind of having 21 local boards and the short timeframes with filming. I have been working on a landowner approval workstream project that is separate to this to try and ease some of those pain points a little bit. But that is really kind of probably more process rather than Auckland Unitary Plan focused.
Thank you. That's all right. I won't steer off course then. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Marie. And one last one from me, Tony. Under the list at 125, would that include open streets events? They're not identified, but of course we never thought about identifying open streets events before as temporary activities.
Yeah, it includes events in public places, which would include the streets as well.
That will cover it, because the consent there's a whole lot of things that are quite onerous to create an open street event. Okay, are there any other questions?
Just a comment.
Oh, Councillor Henderson.
Sorry, just a comment, Chair, if that's okay. Yes. I just wanted to talk all Councillor Cooper's points. I think they're fantastic, and just wanted to add that we should be enabling our film industry as much as we can in this council. They're the lifeblood of Waitakite's business, so thank you.
Thank you. Well, look, from my point of view, when I read this report, on the back of the rainwater tanks and our relook at the consenting requirements there and how onerous it was, and taking some red tape and cost out of the equation there to enable better outcomes. This is another great example. I have to take my hat off to the team, Tony, your team, for highlighting this and recommending that we progress a plan change to effectively get out of the way, for Auckland Council to get out of the way and enable things to happen and eliminate the quite onerous barriers. Of course, these things they're littered throughout our structure, but let's pick them off one by one. Let's go through and find what we don't need to live with. That creates a lot of cost. And as we travel through this COVID world, we're going to have to bring life to the city and bring people to events and into public places, and we're going to have to do that quite quickly. And we can't find ourselves falling over the hurdle of the unnecessary red tape and costs. So that's great to see. So my hat's off to the team and ATEED, Marie at ATEED, for bringing this to us. It's moved by Councillor Cooper and it's seconded by myself. Are there any other comments to make? We'll put it to the vote then. All those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Next one is item 12, pretty straightforward. Councillor Bartley, would you like to move that one?
Yes.
Do I have a second, please? I'll second then. And that's the summary of Planning Committee information, the memos, etc. And I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no.
Aye.
Declare that carried. Thank you, members. Nothing under 13, which takes us to the procedural motion to allow us to go to the confidential section. So I'll move that procedural motion. Deputy Chair will second. Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary, no. Declare that carried. And we'll just take a minute and we'll just check that only those that need to be are on the